Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome aboard. We're doing a stream tonight about religion. Tonight I got Joe Hazelton with us. If you don't know who he is, check out his channel. He's been around for how long have you been streaming now, or has your channel been out now, Joe Hayes?
Just under a year, coming up on a year next month, I believe.
Right. Well, if anybody doesn't know who he is, I'm sure most of the people who do watch my content do. Go subscribe. But Chris is joining us. How's it going, Chris?
Guys, I'm good. How are you?
Right on time. So yeah, I guess we'll wait till a few more people get in, but the general topic I think is going to be about religion and also about truth, objective reality, whether religion is something that we. Sorry, go ahead.
That was me bringing up the stream and just before I muted it. So.
Oh, okay, no problem. But yeah, I was watching Joe Hazelton's stream yesterday, and if you guys didn't watch that, it was with Kelly Day and Rance Derrick. I recommend you guys go check it out. It was pretty good. But they were talking about religion. I think the theme right now, considering it's Good Friday, is a good topic. And, it got me thinking about objective truth and whether or not, one of the problems I think that we have today is the lack of objective morality, objective truth. And this is what has led a lot of people astray and what leaves them susceptible to things like, cultural relativism and all the Marxism and stuff that we see today. So the move away from religion was, in my opinion, a bad thing because you're losing those concrete principles of what right and wrong is. But that myself, I'm still an atheist and I still don't believe in religion, right? Or I wouldn't say believe in religion, right? I think there's a lot of truth in different religions and specifically what religion you're speaking about, right? Too, it's like if we're talking about Islam or Christianity, Buddhism, whatnot, right? There's a lot of different things that they say within each one of those different religions. But I think there is a lot of value within the doctrines. There's a lot of truth, but is there something more? Is there something like objective truth, objective reality? And I think a lot of Christians would say yes, and they would get that through God. They would say the source of their, truth is God, right? But I wonder if maybe there's something more to that, right? And we were having a discussion in one of your videos and we were talking about, truth and stuff, right? So I thought it would be good to have maybe a more full discussion about this on the channel as opposed to, like you were saying, we're doing on text message. But I know, Chris, you say that you're what Fredrick was saying. He's saying that you're a pretty devout Christian, or I don't want to misrepresent you any or whatnot, but I think we all got a bunch of different diverse perspectives on this, which could be interesting. But if anybody else wants to jump in there.
Well, AJ, you're certainly starting off with the light stuff tonight, right? You're just, nice and easy, easing us right into it. So, so okay, let's have this conversation. Let's see where it goes, I guess.
Right. So first of all, I want to start with so what is everybody's belief? First of all, so I am an atheist, so I'll classify that as just I have a lack of belief in a god or gods. That's it, right? It's not religion like some people will say it is, and to some degree it can become one. I agree with that. To some people, they're so irreligious and so dogmatic about it that it can be like a religion. But myself, I'm just an atheist. I don't have a belief in God, right? So what about you, Fredrick?
Well, I'm more of an existentialist, so I'm not gonna. I wasn't who I was in the past, nor I am who I am now. But I may be someone who I am not now, or was in the past tomorrow. So I leave it open. I'm an open door. If I'm presented with a few more evidence, I could become a believer tomorrow. But I am spiritual too, right? But I don't like the strict dogma of religion.
Okay, so you don't have a belief in a god per se, but you're spiritual. You're gonna say, like, in a sense, or what?
Well, to me, God is nature. It's mathematics, right? However you want to put it. I don't believe in the pre-described or pre-formed idea of what God is, like an elder gentleman who has a long white beard, runs around the robe, and disseminates good and evil. To me, it's the ultimate. God is mathematics, science, nature, the order of things.
Okay. What about you, Chris?
Well, I'm a Christian. A garden variety, I suppose, a Protestant Christian. I don't really subscribe to a denomination per se. I've been a Christian most of my life. There's been times when I was probably a lot younger. I'm almost, I guess I'm at 39 years now right now. I'd say about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years, I was kind of looking at stepping away, as a lot of people do at that age. Not necessarily step away, not even not believing, but just kind of like, I wasn't really seeing the point. But I would say a series of significant events happened that challenged me and made me realize that I'd be a fool not to believe. That's all. I could fill up an entire show talking about that stuff. But anyways,
Right.
So I'm certainly in the believer perspective. I don't believe that I have all the answers. I think the journey of a Christian, or anyone for that matter, is a lifetime journey. So I'm always learning. I'm always looking to deepen my faith, but also to be challenged as well. So there you go.
Okay. What about you, Joe? Was your current?
Sure. So just to give it quick, kind of similar to Chris, I guess I would just sum it up as about a year or so ago, within the last couple of years, I just came to a point where I was kind of faced with a fork in the road where my views were largely challenged. I grew up going to a Baptist church, and then I went to an evangelical church. And by the time I was about 17, I just kind of turned away. And I guess you could say I went a combination of the New Age route, atheistic to a degree, even, or probably even at the end, I would have said I was a professing atheist. And then, as I claimed the atheistic viewpoint. And then I got to a point where I became very disaffected with the so-called representatives of like new atheism and the people in that space of ideas. And I saw them getting very dishonest with Christians. And then, well, long story short, I got to a point where I kind of decided to look at faith and examine faith seriously. And one thing I'll just throw in quick is, a lot of terms that get thrown around or some things I'd like to explore when we talk about here. I don't like to talk about religion or define it as religion. I look at it more as faith. I've been taking faith seriously. That's faith, say, versus empiricism. I guess you could say I got to a point where I realized myself, I said there's a natural order. The Christian faith seems to really describe that. And if you align yourself with it, you set yourself up for success versus resisting that natural order. And the last thing I want to say is one thing I'd like to talk about too, is the definition of the term atheist, because in modern times, it's a very academic, a very sanitized definition that I find that's used, and that's fine. But if you look historically, if you look, say, at the writings of Dostoevsky, and I've been reading Crime and Punishment and some of his other stuff, atheist at one point had much more moral connotation to it. Like even when you hear them talk about communists as godless atheists or godless communists and what that conjures up in the mind morally. But so just to recap, I would say I'm a professing Christian. I'm a follower of the way of Jesus Christ. I was baptized in the name of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ on December 24th, 2017, on my 36th birthday.
So what do you guys think about the differences between Catholicism and Protestants, right? I've been thinking about the differences of those two, and obviously I have somewhat of a bias because I was originally a Catholic, right? Like I'm an atheist now, but I see differences within Protestants. I see good things within them, and then I see bad things within it, right? Like when you look at, other than the Vatican and you look at the Pope and stuff like that, and their wealth that they have. Most priests and stuff aren't like super rich or whatever, right? Catholic priests, but there seems to be a strain of Protestant priests, right, that tend to own jets and have like mansions and say like, give me your money and blah blah blah. Not that the Catholic Church didn't do that at one point, right, to sell, to buy sins, and they did that. That's one of the reasons, I'm pretty sure, that Martin Luther and stuff kind of came about, right? Like some of these practices. But you see kind of that stuff now too, and I start to see like and there's more of a loose interpretation, right? And I think the moving away from almost concrete like ideals is it's almost the difference between conservatism and progressives, right? There is value in conserving a lot of things, but there's also value in progressing. But it's just like there's some balance that needs to be between the two, right? And I see, the Catholic Church in some way preserving a lot of stuff, but almost being too dogmatic. And then I see the Protestant Church being almost too loose and being like, yeah, gays can be priests and women can be priests, and all of this kind of like, loose interpretation. And, you start to see, when they opened up the what do you call it, the Bible to be read by everybody, that's when you started to see a huge split off of massive different interpretations, right? And that is good in a sense, but is it bad, right? Like, would we be better off with some sort of objective morality, objective truth that we could all align to together, as opposed to these things that we all have different kind of value systems that are based off of things that are not tangible, things that are not necessarily concrete. So you were talking about in your chat, you're saying like you're thinking I'm talking about like Sam Harris, right? But I was thinking more about UPB, right, from Stéphane Molyneux, right, like universal preferable behavior. So is it preferable to have something concrete, something that is not changing a belief system, but at the moment we don't have that, so it's kind of preferable to keep religion around and keep people religious, because if we turn everybody atheist, like what's going on right now, like through the means they're doing it, then it opens them up to nihilism, Marxism, cultural relativism, all this. So I thought there was like, an interesting debate or discussion to be had about, the value of religion, and, especially today, right now. And, should we go back to trying to teach people to be more religious? Is this a value in society right now? What do you guys think? What was your opinion on that per se? I know I said quite a bit there, right? What if you can parse any of that?
I can jump in if
yeah, go ahead.
All right, cool. Because I took a few notes here, because I'll just come back and address some of the things that you mentioned here. So you mentioned about like among the Protestant versus Catholic. Myself, I see it as, and this is only my personal opinion, is the Protestants have it more right in that they were a rejection of the power structure of the Catholic corporation, because the Catholic Church or the Catholic corporation basically said the only way to God is through us, through the priests, through the high priests of the Catholic Church, which is really exactly, in my opinion, it's what, if you actually read the Gospels, that Christ was opposed to. So this again goes back to my argument about religion versus, say, faith. And yes, obviously they go closely together. Religion I see is more of the systematic, the dogmatic use of it, or the use of it for control or power. Now, with Protestants came along and said, no, that's not what this is saying. If you actually read the words, because again, with Catholics are discouraged from actually reading the Bible for a large part, right? It's you go to the priest tells you what the Catholic Church believes to be the truth. Whereas Protestants say, no, you have the word, capital W-O-R-D, the word right here, that you can go and you can read what this man from Galilee said himself. And this is where, for me, it comes down to more about faith and values versus, say, a set of rules. Because again, that's what Christ was rebelling against with the Jewish establishment, because the Jewish establishment said you have to go out and, sacrifice pigeons or doves or sheep or whatever to atone for your sin nature. And that's how you'll atone. But Christ came along and said, no, that's not the case anymore. And this isn't just open to the tribe of Jews. It's open to everyone. Everyone has this internal value. And if we treat everyone as if they have this internal value, these very easy to understand values, then, it's kind of like a recipe for social cohesion. And I think we see that in the West largely, where we see this demonstrable success with Christianity and social cohesion in the Western Hemisphere. Not only that, you look even in African countries. Well, say, look at Nigeria, Southern Nigeria versus Northern Nigeria. I know a family from Southern Nigeria that goes to my church, and the Southern Nigerian part is Christian controlled. It's very, progressive in an actual sense of the word. Northern Nigeria is all Muslim controlled. It's warlords and it's just hell, like literally. And they'll tell you this right straight up. The immigrants I meet, like the actual legal immigrants I meet, are so much more critical of our immigration system than even you or I or others I find that are, born in Canada are. But I just want a couple other things I'll throw in there is with the social justice element has infected both the Protestant and the Catholic side, right? Like,
That's
there's
true.
really no difference. It's infected both sides of it, no doubt. But I think one thing I might have glossed over just is what you were saying about earlier about the Protestants. Like, I think you were touching on like prosperity preachers, like the Osteens of the world. Like, those guys, they're quacks, right? No one. I don't think anyone, I'd say, who reads the words of Christ, the parables of Christ, and understands that story would look at someone like Joel Osteen and think he's at all preaching the message of Jesus. The guy's he's a charlatan, and he's the type of person that if Jesus walked up to him, he'd flip his table over on him and say, "Get out of here, you charlatan."
Right. Yeah, exactly. He's a massive thief, right?
Yeah.
And he was during a flood, I think he wasn't allowing people to use his church or something like that. So this guy is a scumbag, but he uses religion and the promise of afterlife, etc., to get people to give him money, right? And that's not the fault of religion per se, right? Obviously, that's the fault of him and trying to deceive vulnerable people, right? So, but I was just thinking, I was like, you don't see necessarily Catholic priests doing the same thing, other than maybe the Vatican or something like that, like in Vatican City where they're all rich as fuck. But I agree.
Well, there you'd see it in like the diocese, and it's a little bit less flashy. If anything, in the Catholic Church, the local churches are getting the shaft in terms of actual fun being going. We were talking, I think, last Wednesday, about the Notre Dame Cathedral and the rebuilding of it, and thinking the Vatican. What I said in that podcast, if I remember correctly, or that show, was this will be a test for me about the true intentions of the Catholic Church in the year 2019, because that church as an institution has more than enough funds to rebuild Notre Dame Cathedral in its original form or some other form, and not look out to the government for funds. If they want to fund it privately, they can and make payments, but not reach out to the government, which would then turn water it down and make it into some multi-faith place, or turn it over to another faith in the name of diversity. I just and then I think one person chimed in and said, "Oh yeah, Macron is already saying, yeah, we should make it a multi-faith community." And I'm like, yeah, this is about the conviction. This is, to me, and my for various challenges with the Catholic Church. This is, to me, is kind of, let's see where they're really at in 2019. Just to add on to some of those points that Joe made there. So when you talk about Catholic and Protestants, and I mentioned that I wasn't really part of a denomination, and for those of you who might not know, so within the church, it's a big tent, so to speak. There's a lot of diversity, I think, in a positive way within the church. So you have some denominations like the one that I originally grew up in, which was what we call the Brethren Church, which can be very strict in terms of certain things. Like the women come into the sanctuary and their heads are covered. Sometimes men definitely cannot wear a hat inside. Like little things are emphasized. Whereas other churches I've gone to, like the church I go to a little bit more now, you come as you are. Like we're not trying to turn anybody away here. We want you to be a part of things. We want you to, we don't want to exclude people for a variety of, for any number of reasons. But yeah, and also to Joe's point regarding the Catholics versus Protestants, yes, the Protestant Church was created in rebellion or resistance to the practices of the Catholic Church, which basically restricted people from having for direct knowledge or learning for themselves about what to understand what's in the Bible, to understand what God's promises were for them, and to make decisions for themselves. And you still see some of that disconnection today. At the end of the day, I'm in the camp of, to your point, AJ, I like the fact, I like the idea of people having access to the materials to make decisions for themselves, right? I believe that we have free will. We have the free ability to make certain decisions. I'm not afraid of people looking into things for themselves. I think they should, and they should have access to do so. I don't think it should be imposed on them. I think we all know that the church is a billion mistakes because the church is run by human beings who sometimes get things wrong, get things very wrong in a lot of times. But I encourage people to learn things for themselves, not just take the word of the priest, because if your priest is Joel Osteen, you're screwed. if your priest has some twisted interpretation of the Bible that allows them to do terrible things to people who are vulnerable, then you're screwed. You can't turn off your brain when it comes to this kind of thing. You have to pay attention. You have to follow things for yourselves. Right. And that to me goes to the prosperity piece as well. If anybody can take things out of context, and there are certainly passages in the Bible that talk about God's promises for riches and whatnot, but those aren't necessarily material riches. They're riches of a different kind. So if you don't not saying you have to read the whole thing, but if you don't know more context than what you're just being fed a verse here or a chapter there, then you're at someone else's mercy. And it's important to learn these things for yourself.
Well, do you guys believe that the fact that there's so many different interpretations from the Bible per se is kind of an indication of one of its flaws in one way, right? Like if there's something as absolute truth, wouldn't we all have the same interpretation of it in some way, right? Like it's flawed to me in that perspective that it produces all of these differences, right? Which you can say are good, but probably 2 + 2 is 4, right? There is a truth and there is a right and there is wrong. What is right? What is wrong? Whose interpretation is correct? And how do we figure that out? Now, that's why I think we do need some sort of, I think we need an objective truth, but like I said before, we don't currently have something that maybe is a good alternative to religion, which is, in my opinion, the best alternative, right? Because it is at least some type of universal, right? Do you guys think it's something like that? It's got universal principles, universal doctrines, kind of like things that you follow, and that isn't supposed to change, right? That's why I think that, some Protestants that kind of, well, we'll let the gays in, right? And let the gay people do this and do that. Like you're diluting already your belief system. And it's just a matter of time before it's completely diluted, because that's how it starts. You start little by little making changes. So then what real concrete like footing is there to it, right? So
if I can jump in, you're talking about like a slow burn, right? Just the way we have a slow burn into accepting all of these vices. We went from gays, then we went from to trannies, to then accepting abortion at post-birth, to even now normalizing pedophilia. The new norm is normalizing cannibalism. It's a kind of a race to pugilism on a grand scale. And I think this is because of the watering down of some of the basic axioms of religion, right? Because religion, for me, the Bible, and I was forced to read the Bible as a Catholic. And, you know, like I said, I can't stand the basic dogma of, you know, doing certain actions, which makes you a better or worse person. But it reads to me like a nice novel. And I could read a Star Wars novel, and I can find good things out of that novel, right? What does it mean? Like, what does it mean to be a Jedi or a Sith, right? Because somewhere in the middle, you'll get an answer. So, for example, the Ten Commandments, they are some of the most best written rules for a well-functioning society. You don't want to go fucking around on your husband or wife because you're going to cause strife, right? You're going to cause strife with your neighbor. You don't want to go stealing because then people then can say, well, you stole from me, I can steal from you. So all of these rules are basic principles to how to guide your life to an old age, to accept, you know, age as you come by. But the problem is, and it doesn't, even with Protestants, is there's always an individual that sort of disseminates this information. You know, God lives within you and all of us, in all creatures, if you want to put it this way, you know, and rulership of men over men shall always end in failure, right? And that's the problem, because in terms of the Catholic Church was fighting with the monarchy in medieval England. Right? They had to share power because for a time, you know, going back ways when there was a shaman, and the shaman, everybody looked to him because he could speak to the sky god, or, you know, he had direct connection to sun god Ra. And, you know, there was a group of stupid people and they followed him, and it all of a sudden became the principle, pretty much like a lot of the stuff is today, as we're normalizing pedophilia, because people are just, you know, being barraged every day and told this is normal, this is normal. Just before, back in the 70s, being homosexual was not looked upon as something really bad, but it wasn't looked at something that was really normal. But now today, it's great. You know, you can go out on the downtown Toronto, you can go around flopping your wanker, all naked and everything, you know, swooshing it around, and you can bring your kids to enjoy that you know, modern day Caligula style debauchery. So I think that, you know, the principles, if you start to deviate from some of those teachings, you run the risk of running that slippery slope. So it's like the devil. The devil is always, you know, setting rules in opposition. Look, but don't touch. Touch, but don't. And then you continue on till you end up being the very thing that you're not trying to be. Well, I think that's what I'm going to put it, how I'm going to put it there.
right, yeah, you know, I think that you know, there's lots of value to religion and the 10 Commandments that they teach, and I think that, in my perspective, that they're are principles that people have taught like each other, or that our forefathers have learned through generations, years and years of learning, and they figure out what worked, right? They figured out a man and a woman taking care of children is what worked for society. They figured out not stealing from each other is what works for society. They figured out, you know, respecting the father and the mother or whatnot is generally, right, what works for society, right? So I think, yeah, what people do is they throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's so much good in religion that we should be building upon, but I think that some of the flaws within it is what creates its eventual degradation and downfall. Now, maybe there's a way to prevent it and to keep people strong in faith and whatever, right? But maybe that's just something that is bound to happen, with belief systems of any kind, of any faith. But that's the thing, though. It's currently what's going on is we're being turned away from religion, and that's what the Marxists did. They wanted people to then have the state and this as their god, just like now today we have the environment as our gods. But Chris, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah. So first thing I want to do is just let's be careful about using the words religion in this conversation, because I think what we've been discussing is Christianity in its various permutations. Right, and right. I think, especially with some of the other conversations we have about a variety of other religions and their proponents, let's be careful not to. I think what we're talking about from your perspective, AJ, when you started the conversation, is that Christianity, Protestantism, Catholicism is one of the underpinnings, the structural beams of Western society, and so you're concerned that it's disappearing to a certain degree, at least in the West, and there's a lot of things that are falling out as a result. So I think that's kind of where you're coming from. So by just saying religion, then we're possibly, for other people, just to make it clear for the people.
Yeah, not religion, specifically Christianity, because I'd rather Islam and other religions die off. Okay. Why not? That would be good. Okay. If because that's another thing too, is to talk about, is that we're not, like, so far, of my knowledge, maybe there's another religion that is very good too, but Christianity seems to be like a very inclusive religion, first of all, like it kind of, compared to like Islam or even Judaism, right? There's a lot of barriers to get into or to leave, right? If you leave Islam, you get killed, and you got to do a bunch of shit to become a Jew. You got to go get through a bunch of loopholes and all this other crap, it's almost hereditary, right? Like if your mother's not Jewish, then you're not really a Jewish. I don't fucking know. Right. But with Christianity, it seems to be one of those religions that does seem to be the most inclusive, and also, like, that's one of the things that it has going for it. And the value or forgiveness, that's one of the principles that I think is kind of almost foundational to Western society as well. And I think a lot of the basic principles, I'm probably never going to be a religious person ever again, right? Like, sure. That's just me, because of the way that I perceive things, and that I can't just make myself believe in something. But that doesn't mean I think it's good that religion is disappearing, because it is a foundational, it does teach so many good things, and that most people do not have the capacity, I'd hate to say it, I think everybody here does, right? But like, to be good people in some way, right? Without religion. It's almost like, or not even be good, but just have like a concrete set of beliefs that aren't going to be swayed by outside forces, right? Whereas a lot of religious people, it's like, no, God told me this, so I'm not going to do it. And that may be illogical in some way, but it's better than the alternative of somebody that has very loose footings and that is able to be swayed by, well, okay, what is truth? What is really reality? Oh, what is good? What is bad? I could do this. It's not really bad. It's not really good. Whereas these people, even though I don't believe in God or whatever, they have a concrete foundation to stand upon, to reject good and reject bad. And that is good. That is something that we need in society, I think, is some sort of concrete, objective truth. And that's what something religion, I think, does provide for people, right?
Yeah. So one of your earlier points, one of your questions was about, is all the diversity, the various denominations, and I don't know how many there are, but it's a lot. Does that weaken the church? Does that weaken that? So I think so first, and also I think I saw in the chat somebody talking about how religion divides people. I think the answer to both is that people divide people. You don't need religion for people to divide themselves. They'll find a way to divide into tribes and whatnot. So I don't think, so I don't think in principle, and yeah, I'm sure you have some items to add in there, Joe, so I'll step out of the way in a second. But I think that people divide people. So people will find a way to so I know of churches that, you know, there are people who have left or split because, you know, there are passages in the Old Testament that talk about covering your head as a sign of respect to God, and then some people interpret it a different way, and so they decided, okay, it's time to split. It's just, we're not working out together. At the end of the day, in the Bible, there are, to define being a Christian, there are key elements in terms of it, namely that you believe that Jesus Christ came to save people from their sins so that they don't have to face the penalty of their sin. And we can go into detail about that in a minute. In fact, that's what this weekend is all about. Easter weekend. This is the time that happened. So that's something that, regardless of the denomination, a Christian believes that as a core belief. They may like to worship they may like a certain kind of rock music. Some people like traditional hymns. Some people like to dress formally for church. Some people like to dress casually. Some people like to worship on Saturdays. Some people like to worship on Sunday. That's just, to me, in many cases, a matter of preference. So there's enough diversity in the church where you can find a place where you feel comfortable and a community where you feel comfortable and to grow in your faith together with other Christians. So this isn't a journey.
So Chris, let me ask you this. So you're talking about diversity. Would you let in gay folk into your church? Would you welcome them? Would you welcome them and what they represent?
Everybody's welcome to attend, but that doesn't mean we're going to change our beliefs for them.
Right.
Even though even though they may partake in that rancid parade that they go around prancing around like little ponies naked and whatnot.
Well, as long as they're not doing it in the church, right?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, look.
No, because to me it's a fine line. I do not deviate.
Hold on, before you go off on that tangent. At first, that's a rather ridiculous extreme example, but I'll still address it. We have a lot of children who go to our church. There are about 600 or 700. When I went on Friday for Good Friday, we had 3 services, 500 people in each service. About 200 kids in each service on top of the 500 people. It's a big church.
Chris, it's not an exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration.
If we had people prancing around naked, they would be pulled into a back. This has actually happened. This has actually happened to me once, actually, before in my old church, where I was Sunday night. I'll never forget this. I was probably about 14 or 15 years old, and I went into the washroom at a Sunday night service. Didn't even want to be there that night. And I went in there, and there was a naked man. I swear to you, a buck naked man in the washroom, but he was washing himself. I don't know why he had no place to go to wash himself other than the church. But I mean, he figured it's a church, the door is open. He's just trying to discreetly get clean. And so I said, okay, I'm just not going to use the washroom here. Went and talked to a pastor, and the pastor essentially offered him some alternatives than doing things there. So at the end of the day, would I go and round up a group with torches and pitchforks to take out the naked gay? Maybe. But,
no.
Our kids.
All right, let me jump in now. Okay, yeah, so sure. It's not a hyperbole, because we've seen examples of it in the U.S. already, where a bunch of gay guys walk into a Christian bakery, and it's not like they're the only bakery in the city, or they're the only bakery in town.
Were they
There's
naked?
A ton of other. No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, so don't give ridiculous.
Oh, no, hold on. It's not a ridiculous example. It's not a ridiculous example. Just hear me out. So what I'm saying is, these people come in and they push their shit. I'm sure they've partaken in some of those dumbass parades, but they come in and they're forcing their opinions and views on these people. Why did I bring in the naked part? Because you said, well, sure, as long as they come in clothed. But that's not the point, because in their mindset, it's like, I want to bring my stuff into your denomination. Okay, this is why. Why don't these people make up their own church then? Why don't they make up their own church?
Some of them have. But like I said, you asked me at my church, would I allow some naked gay person to come in and prance around? It was a ridiculous question.
No, it's not a ridiculous question, because I started the question off. No. I started it. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
Let me finish. I asked the question, would you allow a gay person who's been known to partake in those parades? And you said, well, no, as fine as they don't come in naked. I said, what if they do? Oh, well, then I wouldn't allow them.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing you have to remember. Here, one second, AJ. Here's the thing you have to remember. Part of church is that there's forgiveness. There has to be. We're not done and finished and screwed as soon as people make a mistake. That's one of the problems that churches have. That was one of the major failures of Christianity in the past, that they have done the complete opposite of the objective Christianity. They made people feel like they're condemned and worthless when they make a mistake or fail in any way.
And Chris, this is why they're smearing shit on churches in France and burning them down and shitting on them.
Fredrick. All right. So the question comes down to.
Let me.
All right. Hold on. Like the thing is, yes. All right. Let gays go in churches, even if they go and they prance and do shit, as long as they're not coming in and saying and being like standing up and being like, I object to your sermon. If they're not doing that, that's totally fine, because everybody is open to forgiveness and change and whatever. And that doesn't mean you allowing them to sit there means you endorse their livelihood.
Absolutely. Church is not for perfect people.
Let them come in there dressed like a degenerate, right?
No, church is not for perfect people. That's not the objective here. Everybody has failings. So,
but Joe, did you want to jump in there with anything? I don't know if you had anything you wanted to jump in with earlier. I think at one point.
Well, I've been taking some notes, but just to address the topic at hand, I guess you say, let's say that, there was someone who's maybe they're known all over town for they participate in Spank Daddy parades and all this and that. Well, maybe they're actually coming to the church because they actually want to turn away from that. You don't know. You don't know what the person's intent is coming to the church. And what I'm saying is if you read the Bible, you actually read the Gospels, you can easily say that those are the types of individuals that the Gospels call on us to love the most. Now, again, that does not mean that you concede your values and your principles, right? Exactly. There's a line that's there. No, you don't let them come in and demand safe spaces in your church. And that's one thing I don't ever actually talk about the denomination I belong to. I'm a Wesleyan, but that doesn't really actually mean that much to me. No. But I can say what I'm happy with about the leadership at my church is there's I guess you could say, there's the difference between welcoming and conceding, and I'm very confident that there would be no concessions. Like if someone were to come to our church and say demand that we perform a gay marriage, even if denying that would lead to a lawsuit, I would say that there's a level of principle there that would say no, because that would be conceding what we believe to perform. I'm not speaking on behalf of the church. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but that's where I'm saying is it's not black and white. You can't just say, no gays can come to the church because you don't know why that person would be there in the first place.
Yeah. You don't know their motivation, but you welcome them in, and certainly don't concede your values. Certainly not. They're there to attend. We're not going to change for them.
But God doesn't say anything about not talking to gays or lesbians or hermaphrodites or unicorns or whatever. He just says you're not coming to heaven. He doesn't say anything about bashing them, treating them like shit or anything like that while you're here on earth. He says to love everyone, love your neighbor as you love the church.
Yes.
So that's that.
I'm
gonna say that.
Okay.
I think
I also appreciate hearing a female voice on the stream for a change. So thank you for chiming in.
Balancing it out. But if I could just address one more thing with what you were saying out of everything you were mentioning about the denominations, I'm going to again just echo what Chris was saying. Is no, that's not a flaw in the Gospels. That's a flaw of humans. And if you read what the message you fundamentally take away from the Gospels is that humans are broken. And I put out the comparison last night on my stream, if you caught it, and it's that if you look at what the Christian view is that human beings were made in God's image, but we fell from grace. We were broken, but there's a chance for redemption. That's the story of the Christian story.
Yeah.
The opposite to that, say, would be the socially Darwinistic view is if you're going to base a view and a value system, say on social Darwinism, which is a lot of what I was talking about last night. I'm not saying anyone here is doing anything like that. There's really no hope in that story, because it's basically just saying we crawled out of the slime, and the best that we can hope to do is ever become slime again. So that's just one difference I wanted to point out. But I guess with the denominations, that's the problem with humans. It's because what denominations are, and it was touched on earlier, is a denomination comes along when someone comes along and reads the gospel and says, I think they're saying this, and I want to put my stamp on it, and then my name on it, and then I want to put asses in pew seats and get that collection plate money. That's a very cynical view, but that's kind of my take on it. And one thing that I'm seeing locally around here, well, our Good Friday service, we had, what was it, 3 different churches? 4 different churches that came and participated. In our church, it's like, what, 300-400 seating capacity at full, and we had like 600 people there, standing room only. So the ecumenical politics, I think what I think is happening is there's right now in society, there's an obvious signal that I won't even just say Christians, I'll just say anyone who's pro-modernity and pro-Western values are saying, we got to put a lot of other shit aside for now, because we're not going to have much left if we don't figure this out really quickly and get on a similar page.
So, Joe, on that topic,
go ahead, Fred.
So on that topic, I see that Muslim will overcome and start to dominate Christianity because they are steadfast in their principle, which is why they grow, right? And you know what happens is there's a filtering that happens. I know we all want to be nice. We all want to be good. I get it, right? But the church, through a period of time, has started to disintegrate. And I believe by splitting it into a million ways, you start to take away its hegemony over its people, because it is also a political system. Like I said, in the medieval times, in England, the power was shared between the church and the state, the monarchy, and you know they could one of the two could remove the other in power. So you know, in order for, let's say, certain royalty to be, they had to be Christians in order to rule over other people. So it's a form of government, just like Islam is a form of government. And I think the reasoning why we're having this discussion right now is that the West is starting to crumble because its basis in that paradigm, that Christian paradigm, is starting to falter. So why did it falter? Because atheists, for a time, people were removing themselves from the church. And I think a lot of atheists were like, yeah, I don't necessarily believe in the old man in the white sky. He seems kind of mean anyway. You know, when he gets pissed off, he just puts out a flood and just washes a bunch of people away and all that other stuff. So people walked away from it. But then you get these aggressive atheists that take it to the next level. And you always introduce the slippery slide, right? Because before, okay, you know, gays now can marry. Great. You can go get married. Go get a marriage certificate. Perfect. No. We must be married in the church. Why? Why are you pushing your own subset belief systems into a group? And then you start to fracture. You destroy the family. And I don't know. This is what I think of it. I think of it as a clash of political and religious systems. And I see on the battlefront that the Christians are unwilling to stand firm. And they're just backing off. They're like, okay, that's fine. They'll be the ones kneeling there and ready for the disembowelment, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I think I think it's more than just a lack of Christianity, though, that is creating our situation. I think that's a part of it, definitely. And that is what is causing the weakening of the family, particularly. But like there's a lot more as well that is weakening, you know, society, kind of like, you know, the university educational system that's teaching, you know, this open border mentality, and some sects, some priests like the Pope currently, right? They manipulate the Bible, and they, you know, use it to promote immigration and mass immigration, right? Instead of helping your own people, right? So it's being, like, you know, used as well. And like, I think the highest up institutions of religion are being, you know, influenced by, like, you know, the Vatican and all these higher up echelons. But I think that, you know, most people, they still want, I don't think like the core message of a lot of religion isn't necessarily tarnished or ruined, but it's these people on top, like, especially like I said, this Pope that is promoting all the stuff he's doing right now. Like, if we had that black Pope, what's his name? Robert Serra. Have you guys heard of that guy? Robert Serra. And he was talking about immigration in Europe and, you know, European people. And he sounded like, if this is coming from a white guy, they'd be like, look at this alt-right Pope promoting all this shit.
Yeah,
but
because he lives beside these people, he knows what to expect. So,
you know, so it's, it is not, I guess you can't really blame the teachings itself. It is fallible people oftentimes, right? But it's, you know, it just, to me, it seems like maybe there is something better, because I can never bring myself back to believing, right? So that doesn't mean I think we should destroy it and get rid of it. But I wonder if there is some sort of objective truth.
So the thing about Christianity and Islam is that Christianity starts to open its doors, right? Like, before, they would not believe that the earth rotated around the sun. But, you know, through time, and, you know, some of the monks who started the universities, they started to accept a lot of the scientific evidence. And I think this will continue as well, right? But then you run into the dangers of, like, we're starting to, you know, absolve fact. Like, oh, well, there's not just a female and the male. There's something in between. Well, now you're getting into something else, right? And that's my fear, is that if you're open to persuasion of that particular group of people, then, like, what are we not open to, right? Because there has to be a line somewhere you have to draw.
Right. So I think the simplest way, my interpretation as a Christian, and Joey may have a different one, but I'll share mine. When you're talking about what to believe, the first place a Christian should look is at Jesus Christ's example, and read what he said, read about the experiences he had, read about the people he surrounded himself with, and follow his example more than anyone else. I know, Fred, you and I talked offline about, we had a brief conversation a few days ago, and I think we kind of both agreed that Jesus seemed kind of unassailable. Like, what did he do wrong? Well,
yeah, maybe we want to let Joe know that we've known each other for 2 decades, and we're like, even when we talk, like, we're actually good buds.
Spoiler alert! Yeah, we've known each other since forever. But anyways, so yeah, we had that conversation. That's kind of the first place I would start for anybody who wants to know what Christianity is about. And what I would say is, we keep talking about the church and the church and the church, and the church as a group of people who certainly can make mistakes. But at the end of the day, from very, very beginning, if you look at the beginning of Genesis, God created people with free will. That was from we created our first mistake at the beginning, but we have free will. People, I know it would be easy for us to, you know, say, okay, everybody become a Christian, but that becomes that same kind of high imposition that we rail against every week on this show when we talk about governments and institutions and corporations and whatnot. Nobody wants decisions to be made for them. You want to make them for yourselves. That's why I told you earlier on, you know, when I was in my mid-20s, late teens, early 20s, I didn't walk away from the church. I was there every week, but I was having some serious doubts. I wouldn't say doubts, but like, kind of, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing? And I had some things that happened in my life. I don't have to go, if we have time, I'll go into, but I won't go into it right now. But I kind of was convicted, as we say as Christians, that I would be a fool not to believe, just because of what happened in those circumstances, over one after the other, tied into each other over a period of maybe 3 years. That kind of challenged me to go further go deeper into my faith, rather than just, kind of remaining at the periphery. So as an individual, we individually have a decision to make. That's one of my problems with the Catholic Church in particular, and I don't want us to be beating up one Christian versus another here on the show. But one of my issues is that people seem to be absolved of their personal responsibilities from the very beginning. When you're going to, not christen a baby, but, kind of say, okay, we're going to kind of protect the baby by christening them. I'll use that term, but I don't remember what the exact one is. And, absolving, kind of making them a Christian from the beginning. But as a Protestant, I believe that child will have a decision to make when it comes to an age where it can recognize its actions. Will have a decision to make as an individual, just as I have a decision to make as an individual, just as everybody on this call has a decision to make regarding what they believe or what they don't. And they can live with that decision. That's okay. Like that. And so I hear what people are saying about the incursion of Islam and whatnot, and I'm not saying that churches don't have to stand strong and be what they believe. But I think one of the problems that people have with the church is the hypocrisy that we've seen. And by the way, I have actually had several conversations with some people I know, and in some cases some staff and colleagues who are Muslim, and we don't necessarily go Christian versus Muslim, but they have their version of denominations too. They have their corruption scandals. They have their rich imams as well, that they're corrupt as well. And they look at the governments in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, who are basically clad in gold, but still promoting being humble Islamic people. Meanwhile, their kids are running off in Lambos. That's a human failing with wealth and power and nonsense like that. That isn't necessarily exclusive to the church. If you think that, then you don't know enough about Islam. You're just looking at, the people in their hijabs and whatnot and thinking, hey, and seeing them.
Well, Chris, it sounds like you're a hypocrite because I or not you per se, but a lot of majority of the Christians out there that I've been to, like churches where, they're pulling up in their nice Benzes and Beamers.
Sure.
I don't. That's why I don't go, because I know I'm a hypocrite.
But here's the thing.
I can't be. That makes me flawless for being flawed.
No, but nobody at church, Peter, or people. Anybody who thinks that you have to be perfect to go to church is completely missing the plot. Church is for imperfect people. We are all imperfect. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. That's what the Bible says. Every single one of us. We are all on an individual journey. So if you look at one person going to church, even the pastor, in whatever vehicle they may be driving, maybe pay attention to that, but that's not really the reason you would go. And even if you didn't go to church, that isn't necessarily a reason to not have an individual belief, to not read and learn for yourself and make that individual decision for yourself. And we talked about the diversity of the church. If you don't like the church with the pastor with the Beamer, then go to the church with the pastor driving a 2004 Civic. Like, if that really means that much to you, then fine.
I think you missed my point, because it's more like, I don't know. I have that silly notion where, Jesus was barefooted, just a robe, walking around, feasting on bread, and God knows whatever else anybody gave him. And I know it's a silly romantic notion. It's just, this is kind of what I look at, because to me, whether he's fictional or not, he was the perfect being, right?
Yes.
Beyond reproach, he was magnanimous in all sense of the word. He was what do I call it? He was not corruptible in any sense, right? But because we are all humans, we're all full of vice, right?
Yes.
But then again, if we know this, then the state of religion really is a misnomer. Anyways, I'm taking up too much time here. I'll let Joe speak for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Joe, if you got anything you want to add in, in this discussion here. Also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I did have a few things I wanted to add.
Yeah. Start off with whatever point you want to bring up first.
Sure. So, one thing, I guess, when you hear people say that general term, the church, I think what they're generally talking about is what I would call the Catholic corporation, right? You talk about the church. And when you read, again, what the Gospels say, the church is not a physical building or an establishment or an ornate building full of gold and riches, with priests in ermine robes that are dictating, hellfire and brimstone to the commoners. That's not it at all. But that's what the Catholic Church has become, because they are the ones that have been using it for power. And when you were talking about the social justice bent of Pope Francis, well, this isn't something I'm an expert in, but one that I'll touch on because this is stuff I'm interested in. It kind of goes along with the direction I've been taking with my channel. Is what I understand is Pope Francis is a Jesuit. And when you were talking earlier about that black Pope, and I know you mean Pope with black skin color, the head of the Jesuits,
that's what I meant.
The head of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope.
Oh.
And the Jesuits, basically what they believe in is they're a sect of Catholics that believe in the iron-fisted dominance of the Catholic corporation. They want to go back to the Dark Ages. And what I would say is it's not going to look like what we think it's going to look like the Dark Ages, because what you see is why you're seeing, look at what you're seeing the Catholic Church embrace. It's all the same talking points of the United Nations. It's pathological tolerance of Islam. It's social justice. It's open borders. And it's replete with pedophile scandals. The pedophile scandals in the UN are the whistleblower reports, and even the UN itself, Antonio Guterres, has come out and said, yeah, it's bad. It's not just in the peacekeeping. It's in our civilian aid organizations. And guess what? It's probably even worse than the Catholic Church. Oh, yeah. So there's this meshing, right? And basically the Jesuits that now have the papacy are aligned, in my opinion, with the same objectives as the UN, is to get that control again, to be able to dictate. And again, going back to, in my opinion, where I part ways with that is the antithesis of what Jesus Christ stood for. He was a dissident. He would be livid if he walked into into the Vatican, as far as I'm concerned, to see that decadence everywhere. That would he would weep, and he would probably turn over a lot more than tables, because that's exactly what the Jewish establishment was like, and that's exactly what it's describing in the Gospels. Is the Jewish establishment just became decadent and put itself on this false pedestal of moral superiority and dictated who could and couldn't get salvation, sin scam, whatever you want to call it. And again, Jesus came along as a total populist and dissident and said, nope, that's not what this is all about. And the reason why he hardened a lot of people's hearts was because, if you tell the truth to a tyrant, of course you're going to harden a tyrant's heart, because the truth is the last thing they want to be told, because tyrants obfuscate the truth. It's the only way they can deceive people into going along with what they're trying to do. But I guess the last thing I just want to break off is we're talking about a difference between, when you talk about the church and in the context of what I've been hearing it talked about tonight, and I think what in general, when it's talked about in a critical sense, you're talking about the idea of the centralization of power based on a belief and then exploiting that. Whereas, say, I'm more of the Protestant Reformation belief that it should be revealed. And what should be revealed? Well, we're talking about moral truth, and we kind of get back to, I know what AJ's been digging at the whole time, this notion of moral truth and what is moral truth or objective truth. And I think that's a whole other rabbit hole we can go down, but that's really what I think we're talking about here, is when we're talking about the Christian faith, you're talking about the idea of a moral truth. And when you get into objective truth, in philosophy, you're getting into what's called the is-ought fallacy. Can you derive values from facts? And so far, it's proven philosophically untenable.
Right, exactly right. So I think that's an interesting discussion, because so if it's untenable, like you say, right, like we can't derive kind of morals or this thing from just basic facts. So is that saying, I guess, what we're left with is religion kind of thing? Like in we'll get our basis on objective truth and reality from God, right? Is that kind of your belief? Would you say,
No,
Joe?
what I'm saying is, if I'll just say this quick, and then I'll let someone else have the floor. I actually did a series of videos a while back, and I did 3 videos. I called them Faith and Reason, because that's what I look at. Is for me, is I was, for the longest time, I was such a hard ass materialist atheist. I would not entertain anything the least bit metaphysical. And then what I basically started to do over time is I had to kind of let go a bit and embrace the notion of faith, but I kind of had to work it into balancing it with my objectivity and knowing when to rely on what. Objectivity and empiricism will give you certain facts and certain knowledge about the world that's useful, but it's not going to give you a set of values. You're not going to be able to derive a set of values from that that's going to tell you how to interact with that physical world. And that's not to say the two are mutually exclusive. And I think that's part of the problem is you have these 2 camps of religion and science that have just gotten more polarized. And to me, that's always been odd. I always saw that one is like a continuation of the other, because really, when you look at the history of science and empiricism and the Enlightenment, that was all born out of the Christian pursuit of the truth and knowledge at any cost. It may sound weird, but that's actually factual. The Reformation, the Renaissance, Enlightenment, it all came from those same set of ideas.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They're searching for truth, right? And like, I think that it's, like with science and stuff, maybe that would have, because of the discovery of science and all the things that we've discovered lately, maybe that was bound to have kind of a weakening effect to some degree on religion, because you do have to kind of suspend belief to some degree and have faith, right? There's that whole aspect about faith, and that's just a difficult thing to necessarily do, right? And one of the problems that I see also is that there's just so many different religions. So how do you convince people that Christianity is the right one per se, right? But from my experience and from my perception, Christianity obviously is the best one, just from the results that it has created in society, right? If you look at the outcomes that Christian societies have created compared to Islamic, etc. societies, it's obviously better, right? But it just seems like, to me, like we just need something that is truth. And I think we could have something that is factually based, because if we can agree that there is truth, right? We can point to things right now in nature that is true, right? Like 2 + 2 is 4. Gravity, that affects everybody, everything the same way, right? From my knowledge, right? The speed of light travels at a certain speed, and always. And it's like we can point to objective truth. So why can't we come up with some type of objective base morality thing? Like I haven't really read Stefan Molyneux's thing, but he said he figured it out with UPB. But like I said, I haven't looked it up too much, but I can kind of understand the background behind it, right? It's like universal preferable behavior, right? It's you can come up with logical reasons why it's good not to hit somebody, why it's good not to hurt somebody, as opposed to just saying, God told me so, God said it's bad, right? And then we can, later on look at it and then look at the stories and be like, oh, well, it's bad. And then we could say it's bad for society. And then we can kind of like, intellectualize it, the teachings and stuff. But at the end of the day, a lot of times it is just, God said so, right? It's just like when a parent tells you, it's like, well, Mom, why can't I do this? Well, just because I said so, right? You're not really learning internally the difference between right and wrong. You're just able to take directions well, right?
Well, it's easier for a child to absorb through almost novelization in that respect. I know my kids come from school and they're trying to push the transsexualism on them, and I'm trying to give them a quick history, and it's hard for them to absorb because the neuronal growth hasn't been completed yet. As they age, they start to really hardwire a lot of these very difficult understandings of what's happening on all variables, right? But like, are you guys, any of you read the Desiderata? Joe, are you familiar with the Desiderata?
No, it doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, it was a poem by Max Ehrmann, and he's like, you could consider that UUPP. He puts out things in a very congruent manner, in a simple manner, that it's almost like a guideline of why and what you should do to be a good person. But you will always have people step into the middle and start to say, well, how do you know that's really good? So where do you stop and where do you end? This is why Chris said at the beginning of this show is like, wow, this is a really heavy topic, because I think what we really want to get to is, can we use Christianity to save the West? Is that what we're not trying to discuss here?
Well, maybe it is what has contributed somewhat to the destruction of the West. You got to ask those questions as well. I think there can be a dual answer here. There can be, yes, it can be true that the loss of it is something that is bad for society, but also maybe because it was flawed to begin with, it also led us to the fact, like, if something is concrete, if something is strong, it's not going to weather. It's not going to, suffer blows or whatever and break down, right? It's going to stay firm, but it hasn't, right? Yeah. So, but then again, obviously it's people, that have lost faith, I suppose, in it. But, I think, I still think there is some sort of foundation that we could have that is not susceptible to, like for example, right? At one point, it was okay to have a bride at 12 years old, right? And through all of history, right? And it's only recently, and it has nothing to do with the Bible, that we consider 12-year-old girls having sex with them rape, child abuse, pedophilia, right? But not long ago, that was okay. Totally fine. But I think anybody here today would not defend that, right? Nobody would defend that. So what led to us having sexual relations with 12-year-old children throughout history, right? Now, whether you say that's maybe, that was okay back then because of the circumstances, because people didn't live very long, but then it comes down to morality and stuff. So that's why it's an interesting discussion. What is morality? Does it just change with the time? Like, even with religion, even though it's apparently more concrete, it still changes, right? Like I said, we don't marry girls that are 12 years old anymore. That is objectively wrong in our perspective. Like, we would all agree. So how do we distinguish that as being wrong? How do we objectively say that is wrong, right? Through objective means. So we know a lot more about science today. We know a lot more about the brain. We know a lot more about how, trauma and, having sex with people before they're fully matured could have on their developmental ability or whatever, right? It could have negative effects on them, right? But so we can use this to kind of say it's wrong, right? We can say, hey, look at all the bad things that happens when you sexually abuse 12-year-old girls or whatever. But so that's what I mean. Like, there's some things with even religion that that allows some pretty bad things at one point or another. So can we have something that is not going to be susceptible to era, to change, to circumstances, right? You know,
I think that's impossible. I mean,
I almost think the story of humanity, and it's what you read in the Bible. It's that broken nature of man, humanity, that we are broken creatures, and you know, for the most of humanity, we lived in privation and predation and ignorance, and you know, it's like it. Well, I guess what the point I'm getting to is what you were saying, AJ. Is it took humans a long damn time to figure out a tenable system of morality, and who's to say if we're even perfecting it yet? But I think the Christian faith is the most, like I said earlier, the one with the most demonstrable success. And we've been talking about it largely in a social context, but just to take it one step further is, you know, because I've been taking the spiritual and metaphysical side of it more seriously in talking to pastors, is what you would be told, you know, from a theological standpoint, is what sets it apart is what I mentioned earlier when we were texting back and forth in the comment sections. That's where you get into the whole thing about what I described as, you know, the irrational story of the death and resurrection. By irrational, I mean by today's standards of empiricism, it comes across as an irrational story, and it's very hard for us to wrap our heads around it. And I think for me, is I've kind of come to some understanding is in some way it has to be that way. It's like it's mythology. It conveys a truth. Because it's mythological doesn't mean it's untrue or unfactual. It is true. And that's a whole rabbit hole. I won't go any further than that at this point. But I think someone was kind of hinting at a minute ago, or kind of to your point, AJ, about a system of morality based on, say, objectivity or objective truth. I guess what I would say is, again, along with this, there's almost like this seemingly irrational aspect to human nature where you would think if you just put out this objective set of rules that everyone will follow it and abide by it and it'll be utopia. And every time they've tried that in the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and I'm not just comparing you to any of those, AJ, but what I'm getting at is, like, when they've tried to create a system of morality or a system of social cohesion based on, say, empiricism, it's always turned out to be incredibly bloody and deadly.
That's true. Absolutely true.
It doesn't take the morality aspect into account, and then that's why you can have communist nations with 100 million corpses piling up in record time. So there's this weird irrational feature to human nature where I think in the last 300 years we've convinced ourselves we're hyper rational and hyper empirical, but we're not. Take away the lights.
One thing though, if somebody says it's empirical, doesn't mean it is empirical, right?
Exactly.
True. What I'm saying is, if you try to take, because you can have, right, okay, you can get into problems with data sets and everything else. But what I'm saying is, when they've tried to create a system of, say, of morality or of civility based on empiricism, it's gone to shit really quickly.
Right. Well, I'm not really saying per se. I guess, yeah, empiricism, it would be based on, you know, yes, objective reality per se, but it's more, I guess, preferable behavior, right? And that, when it really comes down to it, right, when we are in situations of famine and we don't have a lot of resources and wealth, morality gets thrown out the window. Like, we got to kind of admit that morality, I think, is only in it comes about when we have lots of wealth and resources.
Can I jump in on that?
Go ahead.
Because I think it's really important point you're making here, AJ. It's easy to make that argument looking at it from our point of view of decadence right now. And I think Chris might have touched on this earlier about, well, anyway, I guess what I'm saying is, when you hear a lot of the atheist argument is that religion is the source of all the wars in the world. Wrong. It's humans. Humans are very tribal. We're very warlike by nature. Religion and faith and values are what was introduced to create a system of civility, so we wouldn't be killing each other. You know, I'll give you an instance. So in the Old Testament, an eye for an eye. right now in the new covenant, that isn't acceptable. And if you look back, an eye for an eye would have been acceptable, because before then, what would happen was, if you came and killed someone in my tribe, I'm going to get my boys and I'm going to come fuck up your entire village, because that's that human sin nature that's in us, right? That retribution and vengeance. But no, the 10 commandments, or, well, it wasn't an actual 10 commandment, but one of the 600 whatever commandments that are in the Old Testament was an eye for an eye. So meaning that, yes, if someone comes and kills one of yours, kills one of ours, we get to kill one of yours. We don't get to come and decimate your entire camp, right? So that's where it may seem, eye for an eye may seem inhumane and immoral by today's standards, but that was actually an advancement at that time.
Right.
So I guess along with what you're saying is, it almost seems like we're learning as we go along. And I think with what the story that's told in the New Testament is, this new information was revealed to humanity. But again, it's where humans come in and they want to put their own spins and their own biases and their own confirmation biases on things, and they want to put their stamp of approval on it. And it's where that sin nature of humanity comes in. And it's fundamentally, you can either look as humans are fundamentally flawed or society is fundamentally flawed. And I've covered this in a couple of my recent videos, is the progressive mantra is society is flawed. So if we can force progressive change and radical change on society, we can change human nature. The more conservative viewpoint is that humans are fundamentally flawed. So the only way that we can, say, fix society, quote unquote, is if people actually work on fixing themselves first. And before, we start spending all these exorbitant amount of tax dollars on, progressive, drug subsidization programs, for instance, for addicts, for example.
I think maybe both people can be right to some extent, right? I think there are flaws within our society, the way our society functions, but also there are flaws with people. And, often people don't take enough responsibility for themselves. But speaking about the religion and wars, right? Like, I agree with you that it's wrong when people say the majority of wars are started by religion, right? But what starts wars, what starts conflicts oftentimes is differences. And fighting for resources a lot of the times, but it is tribal differences. And a lot of the times too, when there was war among Christians and religious people, is because there wasn't a separation of church and state. Right. So at that point in time, religion did cause conflict because they all wanted their interpretation to be that of the state. Right. And imposing their religion on the rest of people, their version of religion. Right. And that once they separated the church and state, that started to create peace. That started to create, civility and less conflict, as opposed to, you look at third world countries right now. This is why a lot of them are crappy and shitty and stuff, because they still have theocracies. They still don't have a separation of church and state, right? So there needs to be that separation for sure, because, why would you want some other religion telling you what to do and what not? Of course you're going to fight to remove that person from teaching you stuff, right? So like, I think and it's it can cause conflict, right, to some extent, right? But that is, once again, one of the weaknesses, I think, in some of religions, right? All of the different interpretations of it. And then what really, I think, creates peace is universals and universality and, things that are in common, right? Diversity is not a strength. I think we all have come to realize that diversity is not good. What is good is if we all have things that we can agree on, things that we all think are true, are good and right. The reason diversity doesn't work is because we got Muslim people who think it's okay to honor kill their wives. We don't think it's okay to do that. You got all these different belief systems and stuff all mixed together, and it's inevitably going to cause conflict. So how do we prevent this conflict, coming about in the future? We need some sort of maybe it's got to be, I don't think all these different interpretations is a good thing, to be honest. Like, I think that it shows the weakness to some extent, and that is obviously humans, right, that are looking at it and reading it differently and stuff. But, you know, I guess that is just, you know, what we have to contend with, right? Is that, you know, will there be more denominations in the future of religion or Christianity and stuff? Well, maybe not, because I guess people are becoming less and less religious, or, you know, maybe it's preferable to have all these different sects battling each other as opposed to having no religion whatsoever at this point in time. You know, I guess sometimes in life you just got to pick the best scenario, right? And maybe you know, I don't see myself ever being religious again, but maybe I will or whatever. But I would much rather live in a country full of Christians as opposed to atheists.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So if I can, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead. No,
I just say something quick, and then let you go with it. But I think I kind of forgot it. But anyway, no. Just to your point, yeah, it's the shared values that I think it comes down to. It's not about setting rules and, you know, do this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and 1, 2, 3. It's the shared values, and that's why. And the Christian message, the message of the Christian way, or the message of Christ, is that this is open to everyone. And you know, I kind of think there are some, when you talk about, say, like these denominations battling it out, it's maybe it was like that before. I don't know if there's so much of a battling. And yes, I think there's going to continue to be disintegration. But I remember the last point I wanted to make, and then I'll open up to the floor, but not to sound like a cop-out, but really, I guess what I came to fundamentally accept, AJ, is that because of the broken nature of man, it's just a truism that we're going to have to contend with these issues inevitably. But that's just what I wanted to put out there.
To that point that you just made there, Joe, I agree with you that I think that one thing we cannot forget, especially if we're looking at this from a Christian context, is that we come out of the gate flood. There's no perfection at birth, so to speak. So we're always going to have challenges, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things we're challenged to, I guess you could say, fight, is our nature, our sinful nature. That's kind of part of our Christian belief. That's part of why Jesus's example is so important, since he was perfect to begin with, and as trying to be more like him, and failing and trying and failing and trying. But that's part of the process.
I'm the only perfect one here.
Fred, I know you want to jump in, so go ahead.
No, I was gonna. So
I don't want to cut you. I don't want to cut you off.
I'm not as meticulous as Joe, man. He's taking notes. I should learn from him. So there's a few things you just mentioned right now that piqued my interest, which was we're all flawed, and yeah, we are, but we are all also perfect from that and I'm going to get pretty metaphysical right now. Perfection is the sense of imperfection, because if perfection was a state, it would not, time itself would cease to exist. The planet would not need to spin, because everything is harmonious and perfect. But because it's not, because we are falling into a gravity well, and we have a pull of the moon and whatnot, there's a sense of stability, right? That what I like to call is the SOC, the theory, which is the self-organized criticality. Joe might be familiar with it. I think, Joe, you're an engineer by background, right? So in that sense,
I work in IT, but I'm more of management, not one of the engineering.
Okay. Yeah, me too. I'm a project manager.
Me too. Sweet.
Me too. Sweet.
All three of us are PMs. Okay, it's good stuff.
Hey, Jay, you got to get on the PM train. That's where it's at.
No, it's bad lately, man. It's
true. That's great, Jay. Save yourself.
Hey, James, he's in the chat. Okay, so let me put it this way. So I heard a few comments saying.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So I heard one of the things was, it's not people that start wars or start conflict. It's not religion, it's people. I disagree there, because the religious systems primarily are the kind of political systems. Well, I'm going to take it back really far here right now. So during the Roman era, the Greeks had their kind of the gods, which set rules and drew up laws from those beliefs in those certain gods, right? They had deities, and each deity was responsible for this and that. And if you did something that way, oh, you're going to get punished. If you did something this way, you're going to get rewarded. And then we went to Rome. The Roman era had kind of borrowed from those Greek deities, and they developed their own as well. And then you had the barbaric tribes, right? So Rome was a set of little city-states. They had come together and then started to try to spread out. And they went in, they called the Germans barbaric, who were, and the French tribes, who were paganists. And they weren't as united. And, you know, during the push of Christianity, this is what kind of brought everybody together. Charlemagne, Constantinople, Rome, when they adopted that single religion, they were very strong. And then same with Islam, as it spread from Saudi Arabia, because, you know, Muhammad was a joke. He wasn't taken very seriously in Saudi Arabia till he started pillaging and adopting a lot of the sort of Semitic, Abrahamic traditions, and then merged them and twisted them to his own worldview. And he used that as his political realm, a political base, because it governs a person's day-to-day activities. So religions do cause conflict because it's a set of rules that go against one another. Even the huge, I think it's in Malaysia right now or Thailand, there's a conflict with Muslims and the Buddhists. And, you know, everybody had that nice notion that Buddhists were, you know, don't hurt a fly because it's nice. It could be somebody else. But no, they've become militant as a reaction to the Islamic incursion. And a lot of people who are Buddhist, who were normally very shy about conflict, are becoming militant because their belief system also forms the political system. So this is why, for me, as not being very religious, in the sense that I would never walk into a church because I just couldn't, my mind couldn't take in like people just sitting in the pew and praying and like this. I have an understanding of a higher sense of like systemic physics and mathematics and you know education that's been, you know, passed down through the ages, that I just can't go backwards. But what I can accept right now, and I think this is what's happening, because what AJ was saying, that, you know, yeah, I bet there was a time where people started walking away from the church, and that was okay because there was time of plenty. There was the in-groups did not face outward pressure on them. There was no outward pressure politically. There was no outward pressure from food sources or disease. So times where people would be able to walk away, but there has to be something that binds people. And usually in-group dynamics is bound by a certain belief. And I mentioned this to you in an earlier conversation, that Arjit Farki and Danny Brower wrote a book called Denial, because they were talking about the whole, like how the evolution of mankind, there's like many different reasons why mankind evolved beyond all of the other animals. But primarily the culture ones, the cultural subsets, which is like the belief in faith. Oh, well, I see the enemy over there, but I have this belief, this sense that I'm denying the reality we could be overrun. And that faith kind of gives a sort of weird, intangible strength. Because you've seen in times of great battles, you know, you would look at, they would be completely outnumbered.
Right. I wanted to bring that up too, right? So, go ahead. Sorry.
It's very important today. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, no problem.
Yep, we can hear you. We can hear you, yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Did I get cut off?
I can hear you, no problem.
Oh, we can hear you, no problem.
Okay, no, I just had to my headset run out of battery. So what I'm saying is, so we kind of, let me put it this way. It's hard to get my mind in order. So our planet, everybody's talking about, our ecosystems are failing and stuff. This is all natural order, right? Our planet, where it sits on Orion's belt and arm, modulates between the upper part of the arm and the lower part of the arm. It just goes up and down. And they believe, some scientists have calculated, that at periods where it oscillates, those are the periods of those 4 or 5 great extinctions. Same with political and economic and social systems. There's oscillation. And I think we're reaching a point of oscillation where it's maybe the best in our best interests, in the best West interests, to start becoming more and more religious rather than not. But not abandoning, at the same time, not abandoning the scientific achievements and knowledge that we've come across. So
right.
So Fred,
sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
You want to interject?
Okay. So sure. So Fred, I agree with you on what you were saying there at the end there about. I'm not against more Christianity. Let's put it that way. But I'm definitely not against people. I'm not for people turning their brain off. Right. Absolutely. I think that. I don't see there being a conflict between science and logic and Christianity. If anything, if the Bible is providing the broad strokes, for example, how the universe may have been created, then science is filling in those strokes with the details as we're looking to understand how the universe is created and whatnot. And that's changing all the time. So we're learning more about how that seeking knowledge is wonderful. I don't see a conflict there. I think that's one of the problems that people have found with the church in the past. I think you mentioned earlier in the chat about how at one point people thought that the sun revolved around the earth, and then we learned differently. And there's been that push and pull, but I think there's kind of a reconciliation that's coming. And to a point that Joe made earlier, I think that denominations, these splits that we've had in the past, and yes, there will be more because we're humans and we're flawed and we'll break up over nothing. But I think that there's also realization and maturing that people are learning that, hey, we have to come back together. We're more similar than we're different, and those differences that we have aren't significant enough to not come together and worship together and work together to take care of each other. Regarding your point about maybe it's a time to come back together. So when I look at the Bible as a whole, as the end to end, I see several trends reoccurring. It's just a push and pull between God and people for power, so to speak. And God wins because God is God. But people will always try to assert themselves to a certain degree. And if I look at the story of the Israelites in the Old Testament, and I'm not saying you to follow Old Testament laws. If that's one of the reasons why the Old Testament is there, so that you can see the whole story, the whole context, the whole passage, the whole journey to get to Jesus Christ and then beyond him, so you can understand the whole picture. And you look at the push and pull there, where the Israelites would get close to God, thank you, and then they get a little comfortable and they start to fall away, and then all of a sudden God allows a foreign invader to come and say, okay, we're going to take all your stuff. And then they say, oh, God, help us. And then eventually, they come back to God and he gives them the strength to go and fight off the invader, and so on and so on. It happens over and over and over again. And even when I look at the story of Christ, I know we were talking earlier about some of the foreign invaders of today, so to speak. It's interesting that we're having this conversation on this weekend in particular, because when I think about this weekend, Good Friday to Easter Monday, and the crucifixion of Christ, and I think about how the Christians in that time weren't Christians yet, because Christ hadn't been crucified. Jesus basically grew up in the Jewish faith. He became a rabbi in the Jewish belief. And the difference, the way oversimplified difference between Christians, Muslims, and Jews is that Jews are waiting for a Messiah still. Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Protestants believe that we have a direct line to Jesus. We don't have to go through priests. We don't have to say 30 Hail Marys, etc., etc. Catholics believe that some of those rituals are critical. And then you have Muslims who don't believe Jesus was the Messiah. They believe he was a high teacher or a prophet, but Muhammad and his teachings are on top of that to enhance things further. So when looking at the story of Christ in his resurrection, in his death, you had the crucifixion of Christ, and then you had, after that happened, a lot of people scattered. Things got real. Things got kind of dark when you have Palm Sunday, which was last Sunday. That is the date, a week, roughly a few days before his crucifixion, where Christ entered Jerusalem. He re-entered Jerusalem. And what you have to understand, and this is kind of what we've been talking about, what the people expected, what the Jews expected from their Messiah, was a king on a horse with an army who was going to rescue them from the Romans, because Israel was under jurisdiction of the Roman Empire at that time. And so Jesus comes in to Jerusalem, and he's riding a donkey, and he's got a few guys with him, a few friends following him, but the people they laid down palms on the pathways leading into Jerusalem as a sign of respect to him as a king, and they laid on cloaks as well under the path of the donkey. That didn't last very long. Basically he was treated and raised up on high, and then the people and really the establishment. And you can think about, what is the establishment today? Well, that's the news media. That's some governments that don't want to use Christ for their benefit, use it when under convenience. That's corporations. That's those mega church pastors you guys talk about. Those Zionist preachers maybe who are all pro things that aren't necessarily go for us. And basically they saw that they couldn't manipulate this guy for their purposes, so they pulled him down, accused him of trumped up nonsense, sentenced him the Roman. The establishment at the time said, whatever, do whichever you want with him, and sent him off to be crucified. But then 3 days after that, he rose again, even more powerful than he was before, and basically started the church. And so what I'm seeing today is the church and Christ. Basically, in the Bible, it says that the church is Christ. It's him on earth. So the church is being pulled down, and a lot of it is through the church's own accord. When I think back to when I was a kid, and granted, I was just a kid, and I was in the church, and I was learning about things, especially in that early church I was in, I was a lot more strict on things than I am today. A lot more judgmental on things than I am today. I know I might sound soft to some people in terms of what I believe, but again, going back to that example I gave earlier, all Christians have to look to Jesus Christ's example. That is the gold standard for us. You can't, Fred, you know me for 20 years, I screw up all the time. You want to know about Christianity? Yes, look at me, sure, but understand that I'm trying to do my best. Ultimately, reading Jesus's words and reading Jesus's teachings should teach you what Christianity is about. Not some mega church pastor with there's several passages in the Bible that talk about how God feels about false teachers and what will happen to them at a certain point. I'm not concerned about false teachers because I am doing the work to try and learn about things on my own, and also to ask certain questions in a critical way in my religious setting with other Christians. And that's what I encourage everybody to do. That's what at the end of the day. And then you will see what I'm talking about, those patterns in human history through the Bible, those patterns in some of the stories here, because the stories, when you look at when things were written in the Bible and what happens later on, it doesn't necessarily, in some cases it's very explicit, but in other cases it says, something will happen and it's very figurative, but then you can see the connections later on when it actually happens. And it's things that are prophesied hundreds or thousands of years in advance. It's so much more. This is what I talked about earlier in the chat, and I know I'm going on too long, so I'll stop in a second. But I talked about earlier in the chat where there was a set of circumstances that I had in my late teens, early 20s, where I kind of was questioning some things, and I realized I had to. At the end of it, I was convicted from a Christian perspective. I was convinced that I would be a fool not to be a Christian. And what happened, without going into too much detail, what happened is I had to make a decision between, and a lot of people have this decision to make, and then they don't necessarily think about it the way I think about it, but this is what happens. You're brought to church as a child, and you're taught as a child in Sunday school certain things, and maybe you believe it or you don't. But I came to a point where I needed to make a decision. Do I believe this stuff or not? Do I really believe it or not? Is it deep enough with some of the things that I'm challenged with in my life at this stage, where I was going off to school and away from home for the first time and everything. Do I really believe this stuff, or am I just going to do my own thing? So I ended up getting to a point through a set of circumstances where I realized this was it for me. And I realized there was enough meat and challenge in it that I was able to see that there's enough here for a lifetime. Anyways, I'm going off on a million tangents there.
Yeah.
I can tell you.
Go ahead, buddy.
You're very passionate about.
Well, you know what? I am very passionate. That's why you guys mentioned religion. I'm like, guys, are you sure you really want me to have this conversation with you?
The guy doesn't drink. I invite him to go for a beer with me. And he's like, I'm going to have a glass of milk. It's like annoying.
But I don't. That's not because of my faith.
I don't know. It sounds like to me like a pious.
No, it's
well,
not.
I wanted to
go ahead.
cover one of the topics there that I think you were kind of like, Fred, and that you're kind of hitting on was the belief in God and how it can make you do things that are great, that will put your life on the line, right? And I think that's something that we do lack today. Like maybe the belief in a higher power and a God and something that is greater than oneself is what allows us to do things that will put our lives at risk, as opposed to thinking, you are just this individual being that is not attached to anything greater than oneself. That's not to say somebody who's an atheist wouldn't sacrifice themselves for somebody or something, but I think that it probably increases the likelihood of them doing it. Plus, I've heard stories of people. I heard this one discussion between this guy, Stefan Molyneux, and this other religious guy. And Stefan Molyneux, his mother, went down this road where she went nuts, and she was not very religious, right? And she went down a really bad road. Whereas this guy's mother had kind of the same experiences as his mom, but always had God to hold on to, right? And this allowed her to kind of move past it, get through it. So, I looked at stuff like that, and I think that, sometimes the belief in stuff that may or may not be true could still be beneficial for humanity and humans in the long run. So maybe there's a value in stuff that is not necessarily true, or maybe it is true. I'm not saying it isn't true, right? Maybe it is completely true, but that is something to think about, right? And I don't know if Joe, if you wanted to interject earlier at one point or not when Chris was speaking. I'll let you interject though.
Oh yeah, I'll just throw in again is again, I think what you're again is when you come to truth, that itself is a whole Pandora's box.
Right. It is.
But I guess what it came down to for me was the way I looked at it. There's a concept. I don't know if people on here are familiar with it, and this is a whole rabbit hole we could go down. I don't mean to interject at this late, but throughout the gospel, you hear about the word and truth being over. It's a repetitive theme. And the Greek word that comes to mind is logos. And that is basically speaking chaos into order through the gift of the word. It's the one thing that humans have that nothing else has, and it's what separates us. And I think that's kind of like what the message is in the Gospels is we have the word. It's what gives us this edge over everything else. It's kind of like the spark of the divine in us, and it's how we can come to know truth. And for me, what it came down to is when I looked at it, you touched on it earlier, AJ, is kind of the flip side to that is when you look at the prevailing secular intelligentsia right now, it's moral relativism, cultural relativism. It's all this logically untenable postmodernist babble, really. And I just looked at it as I had to anchor down somewhere because, again, one of those quotes, I'm not sure who it's attributed to, but it states that if you believe in nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I think kind of what one of the consensuses that's out there is that when you come down to it, the only thing worse for a society than Christianity is the absence of Christianity, because as imperfect and with whatever negative externalities it may have, when you remove it, whatever comes in to fill in the vacuum, or what we're seeing coming to fill in the vacuum. Because in my lifetime, I've witnessed this. I'm 37. And I can honestly say in my lifetime, I've watched the culture go from what I would say tilting toward Christianity to starting to tilt away. Now it's running in the other direction for the hills, away from Christian. Everything is completely inverted now. What I was told was moral and wholesome and virtuous growing up, all of that's been flipped on its head right now.
That is, good point.
In my lifetime. And that is really a few years ago, because for a long time I grew up kind of, I guess you could say, buying into these morally relativistic, cultural relativistic. I don't know. I think I thought it made me smarter than Christians or something, because I could handle these chaotic and contradictory ideas and they couldn't. And that's kind of the attitude. That's kind of what we try to get across in my videos, is like this smug elitist attitude among the people that are just working to hammer and smash Christianity into the ground. And one thing I want to throw out there is, we're talking about Islam earlier. One thing you guys have to realize, once they've obliterated Christianity, they're going to try to censor Islam. And that's when things are going to get really interesting, because historically, whenever that's happened, the Islamists end up winning. The liberals get the bullet too in the end. But this pattern, this is why I've become kind of obsessed with history in the last few years too, is because you see these patterns, and when you can see these patterns, you can start to project them out into the future. And again, it's where the contrast of worldviews comes in. A conservative worldview looks to the past and looks to see what we can pragmatically learn from the past and apply to the future. And that's why most conservatives look right now and say, man, we've got it pretty damn good. The progressive secular humanists, the reason why they say we've got it so bad right now is because they're comparing it to an abstract utopia in the future that's never going to happen, because it's never happened. Anytime they've ever tried to march toward that utopia, it's always ended in a bloodbath. But this is that contrast of worldviews, and what I think scares me is how polarized it is now. I don't remember this polarization of worldviews when I was younger, say 20 years ago. Again, back then it was the evangelical Christians who were being the nutcase, politically correct harpies. Back, say, 20 years ago when I was in high school, they were the ones who were trying to censor everybody and trying to tell everyone what they can listen to.
It's
and what
true. Yeah. Absolutely. That's why I turned away more and more from the church.
That was at the time when I turned away from the church, because that was what the cultural example of Christianity was at that time. And since I wasn't equipped properly coming up in the church, because I was that kid that had questions, and the kids that had questions just got told to leave, or just they didn't want to arm you with any arguments. They just want to say, no, you just got to believe whatever, just overly simplistic. And I look back and imagine if they had taken the time to arm their critical thinkers with arguments, instead of just, because what happened is people like me went off. We got attracted to the new atheist ideas and other things that, in retrospect, I think really missed a lot of important aspects. Like, they kind of got famous by arguing with the short bus of what Christianity had to offer, like the Ken Hovens and Ken Hams and world, right? Like real dumbasses. It didn't have any real challenge, and a lot of people fell for that, myself included. But and again, just one other thing I'll say is that's kind of why I'm so motivated to do this, is because I understand that mindset that's working so hard to erode what I now believe in, but what I was, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, I was indoctrinated to reject growing up. My East Coast liberal middle class socialist upbringing was just that collectivist mindset. Big Brother's going to take care of you. The transfer payments are going to take care of us, and Nova Scotians are basically just happy being poor. That's really the reality of the situation. We're happy living off of handouts as long as we can pay the bills, get our food, get a 2-4 on the weekend.
Chris,
and now maybe a 0.5 gram, they're happy, and
Chris, isn't
that I was gotten to.
Chris, you know about the Bible better than I do. Both you and Joe. But is there something in the Bible about idle hands make for
idle hands, devil's plaything?
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well,
yeah. So going back to my long rant before, but I'll keep much shorter this time. Anytime a society gets a little too comfortable, it opens itself up to anything. It opens itself up to anything. So here I know people are struggling in some cases in the West, but we're very busy. We're a little too busy to really challenge certain things. So we're letting other people doing our thinking for us, and our hands are kind of idle. And so here we are again.
Well, there's also there's a spear at the end of a lot of the things. Like, I can't. This is the reason why I don't show my face, because I work for a very liberal company, and good God, if I was even just able to speak my mind just in a nice, non-colloquial way, like how Joe speaks, I'd be thrown out the window. It's we've come to that point in society, and this is kind of like cyclical, as I mentioned, right? But when you talk about idle hands and stuff like that, it's not only mentioned in the Bible. Hobbes talked about that. He talked about, there was the three big philosophers at that time, and I stand by Hobbes more often, because he says, what the worst thing for humanity is a sense of lull. Right, because people get weaker, they don't perform as well. You get used to being lazy, and you forget. People forget hardships. That's why I said in my previous video, why boomers and millennials are more and more socialist than ever before, and most of them are atheists as well, is because they remember that hardship and they don't want to go through it again. Right? I get it. It's. I don't know if Joe's familiar with the Mouse Utopia experiments. It's happening exactly like it was in the Mouse Utopia experiments. They had these mice who were a particular in-group, right? They were a in-group, and they started introducing different groups that are not part of that colony. And the whole shit started falling apart. There was gay mice. There was mice that were eating other mice. There was females that were self-aborting themselves. All of the colonies collapsed. That's exactly what's happening right now. And it's unfortunate, because that's the quirk of humanity, is because we want to be as individual as possible, right? That's what religion preaches. Be an individual, but be an individual with a certain parameter, with an understanding that you have a responsibility to the greater whole. We're a gregarious animal, but at the same time, we hate each other. That's this kind of like, to me, like light. It's a wave and it's a particle. But I think in this time we need to be very vigorous and on guard with what's happening around our society. Otherwise, we will be, patient in the history book.
And just before somebody else before you chime in, Joe, the second part of that idle hands piece, I just looked it up because I remembered something there. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Idle lips are his mouthpiece. And think about the things that are being spoken about today and some of the concepts, and I think that that ties in nicely to what we're seeing with some of these concepts today. Go ahead, Joe.
No, just quickly, and I brought this up at the beginning, and it's something that I kind of wanted to. I'm kind of exploring myself, but again, it's the term atheist itself, and how atheist, I'm thinking today, has a very watered down definition. It's more of an academic definition than anything. But if you look back, previously, like I had stated before, it had more of a moral definition to it. I think for a longest time, before like the new atheist came out and made it trendy, I don't ever remember ever hearing that term in modern parlance, really. And like I'd mentioned earlier, I've started reading into like Dostoevsky and other authors, and he explored the idea of atheism, and I had mentioned it earlier. If you look back in like kind of the old U.S. anti-communist rhetoric during the Cold War, and that it would talk about the godless commies. And I think I read somewhere that the reason they put "In God We Trust" on the money was like a fuck you to the communists, the godless commies. So we're going to put "In God We Trust" on the money. There's also a whole other rabbit hole you can go down with putting God on monetary notes, but we won't go down that. But I guess, yeah, just that term atheist and what it means now versus then. And just, I think back then it carried a lot more weight. If you were a godless atheist, then, if you didn't have the morality of God to teach you that people have individual value, then what is to stop you from clubbing them over the head and taking what you want? Now, people in modern times will look at that and say, well, that's stupid. People know how to deal with one another. Really? You know that because you live in the West and you've been brought up in decadence. That's how you know these things. What I was saying, a point I started to make earlier, AJ, and I think I got sidetracked, was something you had touched on, and it's kind of the inverse of what I just stated. It's very easy for us to make these liberal cosmopolitan judgments about old religious systems from where we're sitting, right? We're talking to each other over ones and zeros, over bits of data transferred over the internet, for crying out loud. It's magic. Let's just, get down to it. This is a bloody miracle. But if we didn't have this decadence, you would need something like the Christian faith to get you through the predation and ignorance that, there's a reason why women used to spend their entire lives having kids, is because half of them would die.
Right. Yeah, there was a lot of horrible things back in the day that religion definitely helped overcome, right? Sorry. But yeah, no, I think you're 100% correct there, right? And I see a lot of value in religion, and that's the thing. I don't want it to be gone. I don't want I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just have my own specific problems with it per se, but I know that we do need it, especially now. And I defend it more and more these days because of the smug liberals who kind of think they're better, right? Like you were kind of saying earlier, how when you were first kind of an atheist, I don't know if you were saying you're an atheist kind of before for a little while.
For all intents and purposes, yeah. I wanted
more or less, right? Yeah, your lack of belief in a God, right? And when you first become an atheist, when I know many people first become atheists, they have this type of angst, or they're angry towards religion for a little while, and they blame it for a lot of things and stuff. But usually that subsides over time, I think, for most people. And I try to give people sometimes a pass with just some of the shit that they say, because I'm like, yeah, I could see myself saying something similar maybe a little while ago when I first became kind of irreligious or whatever. But more and more now, you just see what the results of a lack of religion is causing on society, and you're like, okay, wait, maybe this isn't such a good idea.
Right. Maybe there's something to gender roles, maybe there's something there. There's some natural order that was tapping into that we're just ready to completely abandon.
Well, when I read religion and when I read doctrine and stuff like that, what I do see so much truth within it, right? And then I also see stuff like when they say not to eat, I don't know, pork or something like that, right? And it seems like a stupid idea, right? Or a stupid thing to tell people to do. But if you think about it, back in the day, if you didn't cook pork correctly, a lot of people would die from, I don't know, trichinosis or something like that, right? As opposed to...
You don't want to eat shellfish if you're wandering through the desert.
Yeah, you could die. That's what people have died eating shellfish, just dropped dead and died, right? So there seems like some illogical reasons to do things, but then if you really think about the times they were living in, you would have to tell people this, because they didn't know the scientific explanation for why shellfish would kill you or whatever, right? So they couldn't. So it's like, no, it's bad, don't eat it. It's against our religion, right? This and that. So I see so much value in religion now, and I read it, but it's like I can almost see the same truth and stuff when I read Socrates, or I read old philosophers and some of the things that they say, and you're like, wow, that's so true what they're saying right there. There's so much truth in that. And that's why it's almost like, I don't know, if I ever have kids, I may just make them religious, because I might just put them into religious schools and shit, because at least I know it's it's a better path than, because somebody has the video on, by the way. I can hear an echo in the background. I don't know who that is. Hello. Okay, it stopped. But yeah, I don't know if anybody wants. I know Fredrick. Sorry, I cut you off a little bit earlier.
No, you didn't. No, nobody's cutting off. It's just it's such a hot topic.
Yeah. So I just sprinkle one thing AJ said so quickly about the kids, because after having kids, that was a big impetus for us to embrace a faith-based upbringing big time. That's all I just wanted to say. Go ahead, Fred. Sorry.
No, I agree with Joe. After I had kids, and I was, I think sometimes the fear of a being that's higher than a father or a mother can, and the ability to preach things that are basic in nature but good overall, right? Because I just want to bring up Middeker, because I love watching Middeker. I think he used to be formerly known as the internet aristocrat, and he made a new video called Candida aurora, which is a new disease that's kind of springing up along with syphilis and tuberculosis. Coming, the hot spots are all in the South Americas and Africas and Middle East. But this particular fungus is so widespread that they don't even know what to do. They had a patient in one of the hospitals in the US, and it's like all over the place. It's on the doors, windows, ceilings, drapes, everywhere. And it has a kill rate of like 50%. Which is pretty high, and it affects young people and older people. And he mentioned something near the end of the thing. He says, weren't you happy that your Christian parents used to preach to you to have like one partner, not to be going around and fucking everything on two legs, or I don't know, and these days maybe four legs. There's a certain principle to it. Okay, Warski, stay back. No, so like when I got kids, I put them into the church, because outside of me preaching to them, because they could always look at it as, okay, it's just my dad and my mom saying things. But if they listen to other people and they see that they share sort of like a shared belief system, it's not a bad thing. That's why I'm still not religious.
You can let your kids go out and play, right? When you all believe the same things, but.
Yeah, that's true. And like, I had my daughter, during Christmas, she told me that one of her teachers with purple hair brought in a picture, and she was dressing up how she was dressing up her son as a woman. And my daughter was even thinking, well, that's that was kind of really odd for her.
Charlize Theron.
Kind of, yeah, basically. Yeah, I posted that to you. And like, so when they go to church, it's not that their minds are being also formulated by the state, which is now, completely atheist. But at the same time, I think atheism and religion can coexist. Like I'm a Catholic. I'm born and bred a Catholic. Being from Eastern Europe, I've been through it all. I've been through all the little what would you call it? Communion, baptism, being an altar boy, blah, 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 blah. I wasn't touched in any way. But, at the same time, I'm not necessarily an atheist. I like to call myself as an existentialist, because that's what a lot of people confuse. They confuse all those modern.
Doesn't want to call himself an atheist.
Come on.
Yeah.
The problem is with atheists. I'll tell you, hold on. No, it's not. The problem with atheists is that like they confused Kierkegaard, Sartre, Nietzsche. These people were very religious. They just,
you don't need to read these people to be an atheist. Who's reading? Do you need to read all these people to be like?
A lot of atheists bring those
atheism.
No, but a lot of atheists bring those individuals up because they're the ones who, they existentialism led to atheism. But at the same time, a lot of these people say you always fall back down to find a base, right?
Well, I think a lack of belief has always existed, probably, right? I think that
I think they intersect at some points, back and forth.
I agree with you, though, that the existentialism and like these movements is what started more of an atheist type of culture or whatever. But I mean, like just if somebody one day 2,000, 3,000 years ago, maybe they're like, all these pagan gods are bullshit. right? Whatever. I'm just gonna go farm my field or some shit, right? Like maybe I'm assuming there's probably some people like that, you know, that have possibly existed, right? And that's why people add a lot of baggage to atheism, right? And in my perspective, all it is for me is the lack of a belief in a god or gods. That's it. There's no other ideological nothing attached to it whatsoever. But I know why a lot of people think that, because 80 to 90% of atheists are Marxist leftist fuckers, right? Go ahead, Joe, you want to interject there?
Yeah, and then I lost it again. But
I think I heard Kelly. I think Kelly was trying to say something.
She was trying to say something to me, and then I kind of lost what I was going to say.
About atheism and the lack of belief in a god or gods, and the definition of atheism I was talking about.
Yeah, when you were saying like that they are all like elitist Marxists and stuff, and I said, well, then that's their god.
Yeah,
like,
that's what came into Phil. Okay, now I remember.
Right.
Yes, now I remember what I was going to say. That actually reminded me. Yes, so it's that vacuum I talked about earlier, because you know they say they're going to put their belief in the socialist workers' revolution now, or whatever, the Marxist doctrine. That's just something that came in, because what I just wanted to say is, for one of the fallacious atheist arguments that I hear, and I hear what I think it was Fredrick was just talking about, how a lot of the atheists will mill out Nietzsche when saying he was saying one thing when he was saying completely different. Yes, 100%. But what another fallacious statement I hear atheists often make is, well, atheism is the default position. Okay, then why the hell is worship of a deity universal throughout human culture? It's everywhere. Like, and I hear what you're saying, AJ. Yes, maybe there were some people that were like questioning it, but I think that, again, when you have to look at what we came from, the ignorance and privation that humanity has scraped and clawed and fought its way through, that I think that there's something I would even argue is selected for, that needs that worship of something. And it's,
sorry, go
right,
ahead.
you know, so I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea, because this is something that I'm just saying, this is one of many ideas that once I confronted and processed, it was like I finally decided that this was the right way to go. And as far as when I say when I took the plunge and I became baptized, is eventually what I had to do is I had to stop intellectualizing it, is what I realized I had to do. I had to stop intellectualizing it and just, well, what people say, just let it go, just let go and have faith. And as hard as that was, but I think that's part of what the challenge is once you go through it and do it. Because another thing to keep in mind is, you'll see in churches, they'll do altar calls where they'll call people up front, and people are shy. They don't want to do that. But kind of the symbolism of that is, when you look at what Christ and his disciples went through to spread the message, standing up in a room full of people and walking up to the altar is a very small symbolic gesture out of respect for that, as is a public baptism. I was baptized in front of 300-400 people, my mom, my wife, and all that. And anyone who knew me a year or two previous would say, really, Joe got baptized? Because I had the exact opposite opinion of all of it. And it's hard to get it, because really, like I said, I'll mention it. But I did do a series way back. If you just go in and search Faith and Reason, Joe Hazelton, there's a 3-part series I did where I kind of talk about my journey of my thought process of growing up Baptist, leaving the church at about 18, wandering kind of in the wilderness, playing with all kinds of, Marxist, atheist, socialist ideas, because that's where it seems to go, where the mind seems to tend to go to fill that void. It goes to those ideas because that's what's there to fill that vacuum. And then basically me, over the last few years, kind of having to confront all of that and accept, okay, I was wrong and I need to do something about it, because most people double down. That's kind of the overarching point of my channel, is most people, when confronted with these crises, these existential crises, when their observations of reality don't match up with their ideology anymore, They just use mental gymnastics to explain it away. It got to the point where I was hitting so many of these anomalies. I'm just the type of person I had to sit down and I had to re-examine my whole philosophical outlook and read a lot of literature and talk things out with pastors and people who I would have traditionally avoided.
So, guys, I'm gonna broach a subject to all of you, all three of you, AJ, Chris, and Joe. You know what I believe will be the final nail in the coffin to religion is when we figure out what happens when we die. Because that's the thing, right? It's all, be good, because what happens after death, you will go to heaven or you go to hell. And that's a point of fear that people, even myself, I say it now, whatever, when I die. But you go to the hospitals when people on elderly are in their deathbed and they're just looking, they're kind of like scared, but they're excited. They don't know what's happening, and they will turn to faith. There are a few individuals like I forgot that guy's name, the famous journalist and author and atheist,
Richard.
Not Richard Dawkins. He died.
Died from cancer.
Yeah, his brother is a major Christian now.
Hitchens.
Hitchens, yeah. Hitchens, like he's very different, right? Because he's like, he just wouldn't accept God even on his deathbed. But that's predominantly, once people find out what happens after death, I think that's pretty much the end of religion.
I don't think we will. I'm just going to put that out there because it goes along with what I said earlier, and I hate to use it to sound like a cop-out. I think it's just one of those fundamental mysteries of nature that we won't figure out, and that's why faith is there. It's what we came up with through divine inspiration, if you will, if you can make that leap of faith, and that's what's there to help us make sense of it in a way that we can go on through life. Because I think one thing that especially Christianity does is, I think that because we're creatures that are obsessed with our mortality, I think for a long time, maybe that kind of crippled people in fear, knowing they're going to die one day. And I think the resurrection story of Christ, there's something psychologically that does to people, that it helps us overcome that fear of death. And that's kind of a low resolution explanation of it. But to the point is that what happens after death, I think it's in that category of things that, we haven't figured it out to this point, and it's one of those limitations that,
I'm not sure we will figure it out, right? Like the death thing and figuring out whether somebody has like I don't know if we'll have that technology anytime soon to really discover it. So it's like, the thing is, I was going to bring up before, it's like, it's I think that, we can all agree, even if you're an atheist or a religious person, on, not being dogmatic, right? And like some people, you can be an agnostic atheist and agnostic theist, right? Some people just say they're agnostic to try to, like, I don't know, I think it's like kind of another cop-out just because people don't like the term atheist, right? And I understand there's a lot of baggage on top of it, right? And there is a lot of baggage. But, if you just have, I don't believe in God, but I don't think he can't exist. And I don't think I have the possibility open that he can exist, right? And there's other people that are agnostic theist who believe in God and can't prove it, just like I can't prove God doesn't exist, right? But they just choose to believe it, right? And then there's people that are Gnostic, or anti-theist type people that are saying, no, it's not true. And these people are very dogmatic, and these are types of the atheists we see today, the smug ones that think they're smarter and better than everybody, that the type of people that I'm like, oh, you fucking atheists, and I'm like an atheist. I'm like, God damn it. I'm like, you fucking asshole.
That's what I was feeling a few years ago. I didn't want to be around these people. It's like, you go on and on about how much you don't believe in God. You talk about this more than the Christians I know. And one other thing I just wanted it kind of reminded me of is it got to a point where when I did kind of start looking, going back and going to the churches, I expected to feel judged because that was my experience growing up in the church, was the constant judgment. And what had happened was I was now experiencing where my circle of enlightened militant atheist friends were, purity spiraling on me. And here I am meeting this new batch of people who are Christians, and they're not trying to sell me Jesus. They're not pumping a Bible at me, and they're just, I guess, showing me grace, which is basically just showing me, giving me the benefit of the doubt without expecting anything in return. And I think that's what's really vital, is when I've started seeing that in action, to see how the Christian community around here takes care of not just its own, but is actually making an effort to get out and take care of people in the community without expecting any type of remuneration or reparations for it.
Right. And that's a thing that we've lost a lot too, is just that the community, religion, taking care of each other, that's something that we just don't have anymore, and something that the church is so good at doing, or was really good at doing. And that's one of the good things that I think that one of the reasons that they subvert the teachings of the church as well is because it does promote small government a lot of the times, and it promotes not having the state, having charity do things. And if we were to reduce the size of the government, empower the churches to do things again, that would probably also reinvigorate the churches, right? It is the size of the government that is doing everything for us, right?
Yep.
Now we no longer need the church, and we think, oh, we need healthcare, we need socialized this, we need socialized this, we need this, we need that, right? But what we really need is community, and that's what we've lost, and that's what the church is really good at giving people and providing people: a sense of community, trust, knowing shared values, right? Like, people, like I was talking about before, they let their kids out to go play because they knew everybody in that community believed in universally the same principles practically that they did. So they could even allow them to punish their kids, right? Like, I grew up in a small Catholic French town, and I remember being punished and beat by like people I didn't even know. Like, who is this person hitting me? Like,
he's a community kid.
Right?
Everybody's redheaded.
Who is this person?
You Anglos, you're gonna call for us Slavs to save your asses again. I know it.
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying, the community. So that's something that we also need to address, I think, is the size of government. If people aren't looking in that connection, right, and they're like, how do we reinvigorate the church again? How do we bring people back into the church? Well, we need to really promote a small reduction of government, and you wouldn't even need to say go back to the church to a large extent. People would just go back.
Yeah.
No, just all you do is take a few videos of like the gay parades in Toronto and everywhere else, and just say, do you want your kids to turn out like this?
Yeah.
If not, come to the church.
If I can, just one quick point I'll make is what you're hitting on, AJ. It's something I touched on earlier, like when I started reading about Soviet Russia, and it ties in with the Richard Dawkins quote. And this is why I'm starting to have, at sometimes, respect for people like Richard Dawkins, but at most times on Twitter, he's an absolute twat.
Yeah,
true, absolutely.
He's an elitist prick for the most part, but he's come out and said, like, look, I'm not aware of any Christians doing suicide bombings or throwing gays off of buildings or shouting out "God is great" before walking in and blowing up a school or anything like that. And basically how he's kind of having this conflict of how he spent all this time being so critical of Christianity, but yet when you really kind of sit back and take stock of it, in the end, Christianity and the ideas of Christianity have acted as a bulwark against big government. It's that, right. that individualism. What you were just touching on is in the Soviet Union, like I mentioned earlier, it was the Christians who were housing the poor, were organizing food banks, who were taking care of immigrants and so on and so forth. And basically what happened was the Soviet intellectuals came along and they pushed and pushed and pushed and said, no, we're going to feed the citizens now. We're going to provide the health care. You need to stop doing this. And finally, when the Christians bent over and said, okay, fine, okay, big brother, we'll stop, that's when things got bad, because there's always been this in history, this block at least in the West, in the West and in Eastern Europe, of this majority Christian population who had this, what I will call, ideological armor against tyranny, and who say collectively, no, we are not going to fold. But when they do fold, that's when things get bad. And that's what I fear is missing. We've tilted so far away from Christianity now that bulwark is just totally compromised.
Yeah, it's like like I mentioned, it's a phase, and that phase is coming back to the church. And like I said, I can be an existentialist, cynical existentialist, but also be of faith. Not necessarily believe in the kind of the rituals of the Catholicism, because they always bothered me. But I can stand behind Christian. Like for example, I've talked to Chris. I said, Chris, let me come to your church and speak to your congregation, because I want to tell you guys, I want to warn you, you guys are going to be swelled up. If Islam takes a foothold in this country, you're going to be in trouble.
You'll go with your Trump hat on, and you'll go in front of the congregation. You're going to be
Fred,
swallowed by
you
Islam.
are always welcome at my church. You can come tomorrow morning if you like. You're always
all right.
welcome,
I'm coming
buddy.
for Easter. By the way, I am going to come for Easter. Going to take place, so
You should do
All
that.
and I'm gonna like, I want to speak out. I want to say, guys, wake up! Hello, you're going to be swallowed up, because
You guys, you should come with one of those sandwich board signs, and this maybe like a funny costume, like a onesie or something, but Islam is coming, invaders are coming. Something.
But it's no joke, though. It's no joke. I mean, if you look through history, Joe says he's been studying history. You can look through history. How many times have Islam has tried to make incursions into Europe? I mean, you can go in Serbia, right? That's why the Serbians are so this kind of despise the Croatians a bit, because we chickened out. We were under the Otto Habsburg Empire, and the Serbs were under the Orthodox Constantinople Empire, and they were swallowed up. That whole Bosnia line there. This is why we have Janissary Muslims in Bosnia, right? Because my mom is,
Bosnia,
yeah.
Pronounce that.
And like half my family is Muslim, because my mom's half sister married a Muslim, and she had to submit, and she had to throw away her Catholicism. She wasn't allowed to go see her mother. So this is why my grandmother preferred my mother, because she married a guy from Zagreb, and he was Catholic. And so she would go visit my grandmother, but the other one wasn't allowed to see her mother. And like when there was the war there in 95, something like that, 94, 95, we sponsored the two kids to come here. They had two kids, my cousins. And in one night I caught them. My mom was sponsoring them, paying for them and everything. And I caught them one night there. I just kind of around the corner, they were talking about how Muslims should kill all the Croatian Catholics in Bosnia and throw them in a ditch. This is like unbelievable. Like so I have personal experience with this, man.
Right. And that's the problem. That's one of the differences with Christianity and all these other religions, right? There's this, I don't know, at least Islam and maybe a couple other ones, but maybe I'm missing some other ones. I guess Jainism is pretty peaceful or something, right? The more extreme you get with that, you just don't hurt butterflies and insects or something at that point. But there does need to be a balance also. You don't want to be a pure pacifist either, right? And there needs to be a point where you stand up, and maybe one of the aspects of turn the other cheek and stuff is kind of one of the bad things in Christianity, and the good things, but it's kind of creating, we're letting in people who are not really good for our culture, and it's going to create problems. But we're very open, right?
Yeah. I think it's the largely, again, I'll go back to it's what I said about earlier about my issues with that turn the other cheek being quoted ad nauseum. It's I think people are taking it largely out of context, but it also goes to, again, what I said is what these progressives have done is weaponized these actual Christian values and made, like it's called pathological altruism, or like a pathological empathy that they take and redirect at, again, things like asylum seekers and refugees and invert our Christian values onto us to shame us. And it's working for a lot of people.
It
is the problem is they've got so many people fooled. And that's really what, at the end of the day, is what pisses me off, and it's what compels me out of a sense of duty almost, because of having been someone who I guess enabled or went along with these bad ideas for a while. It's like, well, again, I identify with people like Andrew Breitbart in that sense that, we were indoctrinated into the progressive priesthood. Well, not up into the priesthood level, but indoctrinated by the progressive priesthood and swallowed it without questioning it for so long. And then, well, I guess what you could say is I got to a point after having kids and being out in the real world where I just realized these ideas aren't working. So I've got to go back and re-examine this. And now I feel that from the point of view of an anchoring belief of faith, that I'm finally grounded in a way where I feel like I'm aligned with the natural order to a degree that, is, well, in comparison before, I feel like I was fighting the natural order for almost half of my life. But again, for me, it wasn't just so much the lack of belief. It was I went seeking for that substitute of for abandoning faith, and I fell in with a lot of the bad ideas that are out there.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's without that foundation of Christianity, people are very susceptible to everything like that, right? To Marxism, to the manipulation of the left, of cultural relativism and stuff. And that is something that, we definitely need to keep the foundation of religion. But, I also just, we wanted to have a discussion about, truth and whatnot, whether we can figure out, some of the problems with it. And like you were saying before, people take that quote of turning the other cheek out of context, right? And I think this is one of the ways that the left lies and manipulates people that are religious, right? Is that they lie by omission. Just like the media lies by omission all the time. They only show us one part of the story and negate to show us the full picture. So when it comes to Christianity today, what you'll see a lot of homosexual, gay, whatever people do is they'll quote certain verses and be like, well, God said love everybody, so this means that you need to let me into your church and you need to bake me a cake, blah blah blah, because it says here, God. But if you don't read the entire context, you don't read all the 20 other verses that say, oh, no, sodomy is bad, right? Wrong. You're going to hell. Sorry, bud. But if you don't, preach that as well, and all you're teaching people is certain aspects of it, then they're going to be open to, let's open the borders. Let's let all this degeneracy go, and let's all this go, because they're not reading the Bible. And that's the problem with most Christians, whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant, right? Nobody reads the Bible themselves, right? And they just let the priest tell them what to do.
Or worse, their politician, or the media, right, or whatever else, or some commercial or whatever. Yeah, exactly.
It's the church has sort of become codified. You go to church and they're like, okay, now we're going to say the Hail Mary and then Our Father, and then we're going to sit there. They're going to read a few passages of the Bible. Okay, everybody get up from their kneeling position and put up your pews or whatever the leading kneeing things are called. And now we're going to read a few more passages, and I'm going to make a few more prayers. And like when I got my kids baptized and stuff. And I was like, can we talk about something more exciting? Because like
actually, it was great when your kid got baptized. I mean, I think it was your son, because like they were just running all over the place. It was great. I had.
Oh yeah, you were there.
It's the most entertaining baptism. Like your daughter was like punching your wife in the face. Like it was.
I forgot you were there. Yeah.
My wife. I'm sitting there watching this with their other friend and another Chris. Of course, he only collects Chris's, and I'm just like watching this all around me, like, what is going on? This is great. I never come to a Catholic church. This is the way it is all the time.
I hated it. It was like so boring, and I was like, I forgot when he was giving out the communion. Do I take it? Do I take it? You know, and he's like, and sometimes they stick it in your mouth, right? And I don't want your fingers touching my mouth, but just give it to me in my hand. So I didn't know. Do I hand out my hand? Do I put it? Do I? You know, and then I want some of that booze that they're always drinking. They always seem to keep it for themselves. Body of Christ. Okay, yeah, thank you. You know,
one for you, one for me. One for you, one for me.
I do like the rituals, honestly, when it comes to Catholicism and stuff like that. And you know, it probably has something to do with like, you know, maybe the Roman aspect of it or whatever too, and whatnot. I don't know the exact history, but there is something to do with tradition. And passing on tradition and having something to pass on, something that your people do and, you know, continue to do, even if there's not really kind of a point to it, right? There's some, you know, way that it brings people together, I think. And I'm not saying that, you know, we should all be Catholics or anything like that, because I think, yeah, there's lots of problems with it, etc. But I just mean, I like that aspect of religion, you know, even without being an atheist and all that stuff. I like these things, right? That, you know, tradition and, you know, like tradition is really important, I think. And if you look at a lot of the, like Christmas, for example, Easter, right? Look at how they're completely like deconstructed today and how they're completely turned into a consumerist type holiday, right? I read this story, and I'm not trying to bring any conspiracy here though, but it was about like how Jewish people were, how they were writing it, like this guy who's writing it, how Jews made Christmas the way it is today, essentially how earlier on they were the ones who wrote like all of they're the ones that commercialized it, who wrote you know, the little like the reindeer nose thing and like all of the things that had nothing to do with religion, with Christianity, with Jesus, right? So now people, they think of Christmas, and then in the article, like you can look this up, right? Jewish people and Christmas or something, you'll probably find it, and it's just they're talking about how, yeah, we're the ones who commercialized it, and pretty much I'm like reading it, was like, so you're the ones that ruined it. I'm like, what the hell? But that's the same thing with like Easter. What the fuck does a bunny and eggs have to do with the birth of Jesus, right?
Yeah,
that I guess that has more of a pagan.
Yeah, it goes back to the pagan. It goes back to the paganism.
Yep.
Same with the Christmas tree or whatever, but that's a kind of a different thing. I'm talking more about the commercialization, right? The turn away from it being a religious holiday, whereas you'll never see Ramadan being turned into a.
Well, they'll cut off your hands. Like that's one of the main differences why they won't play around with Islam, is because you show an image of Muhammad and geez, your journalist dies, or you're something that's cut.
Any other religion, any other religious holiday, the Sikh holiday, whatever, they won't like commercialize it like they do Christian holidays, and it lets you know like Christianity is the enemy, and that's why I defend it, even though I don't believe it, even though I'm not Christian. I'm like, well, they're fucking after it, and I can see the value of it, and I need to fucking defend it because.
I have a Christmas tree every year with a rule: no presents. Kids, we get together, we watch the fireplace, we have a nice dinner. Sometimes we invite Chris's family, or they invite.
But Joe, I wanted to
presents.
Oh, sorry, you cut out there. Joe, I wanted to mention something too. I remember on your stream the other day, you were saying that at one point, I think you were saying the Jews at one point made up this thing about Jesus being the illegitimate son of Tiberius or some Roman.
It's in the Jewish Talmud, and
That's
this is when
insane. I was like, wow.
I got to read that
Kabbalistic Judaism. Yeah, well, the Talmud is like several volumes, and it was written by the Jewish aristocracy after the crucifixion of Christ. Excuse me. And anyway, it talks in there about the Christ being the bastard son of a Roman soldier, and you can look this up. And the name is Tiberius Pantera. I don't know if that's where the band got the name or what, but basically
so.
it's a degradation of the Christian belief out and out. Like, it's an out. He's not the son of God. At least in Islam, he's considered a great prophet. In this Kabbalistic Judaism that studies the Talmud, he's the bastard son of a Roman soldier and this slut Mary. You know, like that's basically what they're trying to say. Mm-hmm. So that's you can look up, and if you want to go into it, it's interesting because there is definitely this again, Jesus was rebelling against the Jewish establishment of the day, and he was a complete and total dissident against that centralization of power and exploitation of knowledge of the divine secrets of the universe for exploitation. You know, like when again, and if you read in the Gospels, because that's where I get my guidance from. It's not from what a pastor says, or my pastor's sermons are great. Don't get me wrong, but I don't follow any doctrine of faith. I go to the Gospels. But the only time when Jesus showed anger in the Gospels was when he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple, and I think he even pulled out a whip at one point. And it was because they were corrupting what this was all about, and they were counting their private riches in this, what is supposed to be the house of God, the house of Jesus' Father, and here they are counting the usury profits, essentially. And the only time when Jesus shows any type of anger or aggression is when he sees this going on. And you look today at who really is, when you look at how the monetary systems have such a grip on everything we're doing today, and that net keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you see what people are expressing dissent against. You know, there's some similarities there that I can apply to today.
Right. Oh, definitely. Right. There's so many similarities that we can see from what was going on back with the money lenders and whatnot, and even in Rome, and what created the destruction of that society over time. But, that's why history, like you were saying, was really important. We all need to go and learn it a lot more. Right. But if anybody else, Chris or Fredrick, you want to jump in?
I think the comments that have been made recently about the Jews there, and I'm not trying to go down the Jewish conspiratorial.
Shut up, you anti-Semite.
Oh boy, of course. But anyways, not trying to go down that rabbit hole, even though we all know the answer. Anyways, so I mean, look at who controls the media. Look at who controls everything. I mean, it's not any secret. Is it a secret that here we are with Christ being ridiculed and Christianity being ridiculed and minimized at every turn? You never see a positive. I mean, look, some terrible things, some absolutely disgusting things have been done by people who have taken advantage of their position of trust in the church, as have school teachers, as have police officers, as have anybody who's in a position of trust has abused it. And in the most vulnerable place of the church, a lot of people have abused it there, and absolutely those people should be drawn out and quartered. But at the same time, there's a lot.
Whoa.
I disavow.
Disavow.
What? Disavow.
Disavow.
But at the same time, there's a lot of good that's being done in the church. When you look at movies, for example, you see a church. It's distant institution. Everybody's saying, "Oh," and the place is half empty. And then but it's not my experience. That's not my experience. My church, when I went on Friday for a Good Friday, and I'll go back tomorrow, was jammed. With 3 services full of people. That's not the experience. I don't see dead churches. And if I do see a dead church, I don't go. That's why people don't go to those churches. They go somewhere else. There's a lot of diversity in the church, and there's a lot of excitement there. So one last thing, Fred, and then I'll add in one last thing. Let's not forget to remember my earlier long rant, and that's why I haven't said much, because I said way too much earlier. The Jews are not Christians. They frankly don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They think, frankly, he's confused all of us, because we should all be waiting for the Messiah. It wasn't Moses. It's going to be the next guy. They thought it was Moses. It wasn't Moses. It's going to be the next guy. So let's just, all the more reason to make decisions for yourself. Do your own research. As Joe was saying, I'm in the same boat as him. My pastors, some pastors do a better job than others, but anyways, I if I hear something, I'm like, I'll go and read it up by myself. I'll go and do my own research. Religion isn't a reason, and I hate saying religion even. I believe that there's a relationship that people have with God, a relationship that they have with Christ. And so with any relationship, you have to get to know each other. And that's a personal one-on-one piece that does not happen otherwise. Completely platonic, brother. Completely platonic.
Okay. Making sure. Just making sure,
Yeah. Fred, you're in
Fred?
Yeah.
No, I see, like, the discussion on religion can go for hours on end and days on end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the discussion here is to understand the truth of what reality is now. Can we try to finalize this stream on what our goals are and what the goals of Christianity should be in this tide or march, whatever you want to call it, of absolute domination from another culture or cultures, right? There's more than one that right now is presenting a kind of concern for Canadians and the West in general. That's kind of what I want to ask.
Right. Well, I think that ultimately telling people to go be religious and go to church and do all that stuff is not going to work, right? We could try. We could proselytize. I think there's some value in it. But, and I think that because there's not necessarily a concrete objective alternative to promote to people, that the best thing to do would be to promote some type of, or Christianity, specifically Christianity. Some people can debate on whether that's Catholicism or Protestants, whatever. Either one is still better than everything else, in my opinion. Maybe Protestants probably better because they're not as dogmatic, etc. But I think one of the only ways to reinvigorate the church and stuff would probably be the destruction of the government, the destruction of, or we're going to enter in a lot of hard times in the upcoming future. And that will probably, when people encounter hard times, the church tends to grow again, right? And we might just see a natural progression of it anyways. But I think that if we were to also promote a smaller government, we would also see the resurgence of the church, because who is teaching people to be irreligious? It's the teachers, it's the schools, it's the universities. So if we had control over our educational systems, then it wouldn't be filled with fucking Marxists, right? If we had control of our tax subsidies and money, like in Canada for the media, then we could, our media wouldn't be controlled by the government and CBC and all this other shit and the funded media that they give us. So we would have a lot more control over everything. And the church, because it would play a larger role in people's lives again, because you would not have the welfare state. You would not have these things. The church and these types of institutions would have to step in. And this would also help to, bring trust back into the institution, as well as you got to deal with the upper echelons of every one of these institutions, the media, the church, and all this stuff, because let's face it, they're full of fucking pedophiles. And, they're all, I don't know what they do to people, but I saw a thing with Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, and what stuck with me was that part where he was talking about how in fraternities, they all do gay shit to each other, so then it can kind of that's how you get dirt on people, right? That's how you control people. You get them to do some despicable, degenerate act, and then you got something on them to get them.
All in this together.
So there's a huge uphill battle that we got to face when it comes to religion and reinstituting it, but it's going to be a multi-pronged attack. It's not just going to be go be religious again and go back in the church, right? You're going to have to do it subversively as well, in a sense, as in if you can convince people to be for a smaller government as well, that will also reinvigorate the church just by proxy, right? Just by nature of it happening, right? But that's more or less what I had to say. If anybody else wants to jump in, go ahead.
I think that the best way to bring people around one way or the other, to even if not to accept Christ, but to understand that the morals and values that we talk about are the way to live, is for Christians to be Christians, is for them to live that example themselves in an authentic, transparent way that is unassailable, and to basically treat people the way they want to be treated, and essentially to live like Christ tells us to live. I think that's the best way. I mean, I know some people talk about, I'm going to send my kids to church and I'm going to do whatever, but I mean, kids learn from their parents. So I've seen from past examples, the best way for people to learn, rather than just hearing a pastor or whatnot, is seeing it in action, and seeing it in action consistently. So that's my short answer for that.
Yeah, mine's gonna echo Chris's, but just to address Fred's question, you can't change the world. Again, that's the people that are telling us what to do and telling us what we can and can't believe. That's what they're trying to do, is change the world. You can only change yourself. You're a sovereign individual, and it's God that makes you sovereign. There's no state or any authority, really. It's not the state that gives you rights. You're given rights by your creator when you live that way. And if that's the way you view the world, then that's where I was saying earlier about that ideological armor comes into place, that bulwark comes into place, that where you become incorruptible. So focus on your family and focus on what you can control, and lead by example, and lead by Christ's example. And you have the word, so you don't need to go through an authority to tell you how to do that. You can go straight to the source, and that example again is to show grace to people, which means you give them the benefit of the doubt, but that doesn't mean you be weak, and it doesn't mean you compromise your principles. That's the thing. You don't compromise your principles and your values. And when you feel that your principles and values are being infringed upon, you have a moral obligation to use the word that you've been given by divine right to speak truth. That's my answer.
Just to add one thing on that, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're back, Fred, and you can help us to wrap this one up and move on to maybe the next topic. Is so many times when we have these conversations about all kinds of things, we talk about things that are really bigger than us as individuals, but this is one where we as individuals, it is truly as intimate a relationship. I know I talked about it platonic. It's a platonic individual relationship, but it's an individual relationship and an individual responsibility that we have. And to your point, Joe, take care of what you have control over, right? That is what you can do. This is something you can do for yourself as an individual, with your family, with the people. I'm not saying that you can change their mind, but by living a certain way, people like people who walk who they talk. Like, it could be Christianity, it could be anything. That's just human nature. So walk in the way that you want to see other people live. Treat people the way you want to be treated. That's the way to do it. That's the way to show people that this is an example. Just telling them and having these, even this ideological debate that we've been having, as interesting as it's been, and nice to meet people. Joe, nice meeting you. I've actually never seen any of your videos, but you got a subscriber today. I have one video. Don't worry about
videos. He's really good.
Okay, I'll check out more of his videos. Very nice meeting you today. So very, very nice conversation. I'm seasoned enough in my faith that I'm not expecting to change anyone's mind through this conversation. If we did, then great. If not, it's okay. All right. Ideally,
my mind. Hallelujah, Jesus.
It's okay, buddy.
Listening to you, I think I'm going to convert to Satanism after here.
See, I changed somebody.
I was
all of a sudden this is turning into a Steven Crowder video, right? Change my mind, right?
You and Joe did a shitty job, man. Look what you've done to AJ.
Okay, I'm gonna invite Ravi Zacharias. Let's see what he does in the chat.
I was like kind of, with you guys, but further it went on, the more I was like, this just everything has to burn.
These guys aren't cool. I don't want to be one of these guys. I don't have a beer with these guys.
Just join me in my new Christian cynicism. You'll all be fine.
So I wasn't trying to change anyone's mind, but the point is, I'm not trying to be a hypocrite either. So that's all I'd say, guys. Let's just, if you want to see change, be it. And with that Gandhi quote, I'll switch it over to you, Fred. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think here's my very obtuse thought. Okay, this is what I see it. I see that Canada, America, the West, Europe, right? Not necessarily much Eastern Europe, because we're all, pretty resilient to that kind of stuff. Maybe because we drink too much Slivovica or vodka. But we need to start speaking out more. We need to be firm in our beliefs. What happened to the Puritans who built this country, and those Frenchies? Don't worry, I won't forget your ancestors, AJ. The people who toiled and told and
first people here.
That's right. And toiled and made the cities, made the roads. I mean, yes, there were Italians, yes, there were Germans, but predominantly we all shared a similar culture subset. I look at things as I am a racist. I do recognize races. I do recognize that each race has their own idiosyncrasies, and with each race, we also have our further idiosyncrasies, like tribes, right? I am of the Caucasian race, but I'm from the Croatian or Slavic tribe, right? So we all have our similarities, but predominantly I see Canada, I see the US and Europe under attack. Our families are being attacked. The white male heterosexual is being attacked, and hence, in order to attack it, so is its religion, right? That kind of put its base and solidified what the family should be and how a good life should be. Even though there's still some elements of archaic and primitive ideals, but nevertheless, the 10 Commandments, in a sense, were a perfect societal governorship. There were the 7 deadly sins. They made sense, and a lot of the preachings were be kind to your fellow man. If you don't want something to be done to yourself, then don't do it to another person. These are all like basic principles that we all should live by, and maybe that's what UPP is based on. But I think we need to start defending. I'm going to defend Chris. I'm going to defend Joe, even though I'm not a devout Catholic.
Exactly.
And that's my take on it. That's what I want. I want people to come to the defense of Christianity. It's time for us to take up the manna, whether you're atheist or like me, just a existentialist cynic. It's time to help these people, because if they can't help themselves, I'll be there.
Right.
I'll be there. I'll back you up.
France, right, that are being desecrated each and every day, and nobody's speaking up. Look at all the Christians being killed all over the world. Nobody's speaking up, right? And this is our heritage, even if we're non-believers or whatever, right? And these people need help, deserve help, and they turn the other cheek. What I'm saying is that, the Marxists attack them because they're easier targets, because they do forgive, right? And they do kind of look the other way to some extent, whereas they don't do it with Islamists, because they'll get their heads cut off, right? But yeah, you're right, Fredrick. We need to stand together with Christians, and that's a good, I think, note to end it on. And I think I appreciate everybody that came by and participated in the chat. We had a great discussion, and thank you, Joe, as well, for coming along. I really appreciate that. We should do this again sometime, about something else, in the future. But, everybody, good job, and hope you all have a great night. And if anybody else wants any last words, go ahead.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. All right.
Happy Easter.
Okay. Happy Easter, guy. Take it easy.